I would imagine if you're anything like me, video game music is one of our shared interests. You might know of EverGrace as that obscure old action RPG with a crazy good soundtrack, or you hate good music. Sometime in the mid-2010s, I came across this game myself, and the OST was the focal point for me at the time. A soundtrack for an old PS2 game that I had never heard of, where every track sounded as though someone had composed two separate tracks and overlaid them on top of each other. Then there's the artwork, which I found very pleasing. Warm colors, cool guy with a mysterious mark on his hand, shredded clothing, and he's buff as hell. This screamed exciting, cool RPG to me, but I never explored EverGrace beyond this. I was too busy playing MMOs or esports or something. Maybe part of me felt like digging into this story would lead me down a rabbit hole I wouldn't be able to properly comprehend at the time. So, for many years, my knowledge and exposure to EverGrace was little more than loading up and listening to one of the tracks, and later throwing it into my videos every so often, so that everyone knew how cool my video game knowledge was. For a long time, I assumed that was all that EverGrace really was, and judging by how it's discussed online, I wasn't alone in thinking this. It seems as though the legacy of EverGrace is its OST. It serves as an entry point for the series and continues to be a polarizing experience for listeners, even to this day. It's rare to come across discussions about the series that go any deeper than this, and for good reason. The series is kind of a mess.
This is definitely me when I hear track 16 on the EverGrace soundtrack.
EverGrace was developed by From Software. Its composer, Kota Hoshino, part of From Software's sound team since 1998. If you're unfamiliar, here's a quick history of his works. In the modern day, From Software is an extremely well-known and beloved entity. I probably don't have to sell you on them. You already know what an Elden Ring is. Released alongside the PS2 as a launch title for us in North America on October 26, 2000, EverGrace did not do very well critically. It originally began development as a PS1 game, and you can tell when you play it. According to an interview with Masanori Takeuchi and Kota Hoshino, the game was already about halfway finished with the soundtrack fully composed when the decision was made to instead develop it for the PS2. This caused some issues for the team as they didn't fully understand the console's capabilities. Everything had to be remade from scratch, and once the new pieces were all put together, they realized that the original PS1 OST no longer really fit with this new reconstructed PS2 version. So the version of EverGrace that we received actually contains a completely distinct OST, rather than what was originally created for the PS1 version. Nothing was reused according to the game's producer, though it has been reported that tracks originally composed by Kota Hoshino for an earlier game called Shadow Tower were repurposed for this new release. If people who listen to EverGrace's soundtrack are able to feel the world of EverGrace, I would be very happy. And in my opinion, this OST does a fantastic job establishing a world that feels unique and extremely memorable, with just a hint of something being wrong.
Wow, I can't believe it. Track 4 on the EverGrace soundtrack has the whole Discord server looking like this.
The EverGrace series consists of a few different pieces of media. There's the original EverGrace, released in 2000, Forever Kingdom, which is the only other game in the series, released in 2002, 2 novels, and a manga. One novel by Kaiko Shimomura, and one by Mie Takase, who would later go on to write Forever Kingdom, and the manga was created by Ken Sugawara. The games were both released in English, and both the novels and manga have been translated thanks to some tireless efforts by Elena. You can find a link to her website in the description. A massive thank you to her for her contributions. Without these translations, this video just wouldn't exist. My Japanese is far from strong enough to translate that much text. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at the story as it's told through these 5 pieces of media that I know. It's going to be a long one, so I hope you're prepared. I went into EverGrace expecting a complete and straightforward story. Something linear, a self-contained JRPG experience with a clear beginning and a conclusive end. Instead, I found a world that almost seems designed to resist being fully understood, even by its own inhabitants. I'm not here to catalog every piece of EverGrace lore and present to you a clean timeline of events. Instead, I'm going to try to understand what kind of world it's attempting to convey and exploring its themes through my own interpretations. You can think of this as a record of how EverGrace's world revealed itself to me, compiled and shared with you tonight.
Part 1, EverGrace and Shimomura novel.
While we go through the first game, I'm going to reference the Shimomura novel from time to time. The game itself doesn't really give us a lot to work with in terms of story, and unlike the Takase novel that tells a story that expands the timeline, the Shimomura novel mostly fills in the gaps that the first game leaves, while kind of retelling its story in its own way. I opted to combine the two into something that feels right to me personally, but if you want to know every detail, I do recommend experiencing all of this for yourself. Originally, I believed EverGrace was released in 2005. I have no idea where I came up with that fake number though. After playing it for a few minutes, I double-checked and found out that it was thankfully released 5 years before that. Listen, that 0 at the end looks suspiciously 5-shaped if you're not paying any attention at all, and also if you have your tiny TV 20 feet away from your couch. We're prompted to choose between 2 characters immediately upon pressing New Game, Darius or Sharline. Because the cursor is on Darius by default, I opted to go with his story first. I figured there was probably good reason the developers made him the default selection. This would be a decision that would actually elevate the experience, in my opinion, but it certainly makes the story a little more complex, as if that wasn't an issue already.
Edinburgh. A continent that's home to a few people with strange marks called crests. Cursed mark. When I was young, my parents were killed. That was a tragedy caused by this cursed crest of mine. I swore revenge, and in my rage I swung my sword. I wanted to hide the crest forever with the blood that stained my hands. Burn it away with the flames of anger and hatred. Finally, I found the enemy. I entered the Biliana forest, and suddenly, a huge tree appeared. This was only the beginning.
Darius finds himself in the middle of this autumn-themed land known as Saramad Hill, waking up to meet this floating yellow tea who calls herself Chrysalis. Transformed into this bird form by an unnamed demon, Chrysalis is immediately very eager to help Darius. Inexplicably so, explaining where he's at and offering to help him return to his own world. He's very confused, seemingly caught off guard at being thrust into the kingdom of Rubain, which he refers to as nothing more than a fairy tale. He just wants to get back to where he's from. We have no answers as to where this drive of his comes from, but we actually won't be getting those answers for a while. This characterization of Darius struck me as particularly interesting, and I wanted to mention it. But like many elements within EverGrace, we just have to accept this for now. We receive a small introduction to the concept of Palmyra here, which is an extremely important element within the world. It functionally acts as currency for the purposes of the first game, but Palmyra has far-reaching implications for the world of EverGrace.
You took the sword. Good. I'm so relieved. So you believe me now about the monsters?
Chrysalis is also an interesting character in this story. We don't really have any idea who she is, but she's the first entity with whom Darius interacts, and she guides him throughout the rest of the game. In the novel, however, her personality is expanded on pretty significantly. She comes across as a cute and caring creature who really wants to see Darius succeed, a good foil to Darius's dark and brooding anime nature. In the game, however, Chrysalis comes off a little rougher, which I think still works conceptually as a counterpart for Darius. This in-game dynamic they have is a bit less tropey, and I actually found myself believing their interactions more when Chrysalis isn't inexplicably bubbly and bright at all times. It feels a little more grounded in the game.
Okay, it's a deal. As long as you think you know what you're doing.
Listen up. We'll get along better. Sticking together is the only chance we've got to get out of here.
Darius, left with little other option, trusts Chrysalis and follows her lead. His first goal is reaching the Rubane Castle. Darius finds this guy sitting on a rock deep in Saramat Hill, in front of a jail cell in the middle of a mountain? I don't know what this scene is.
We're all going to die. You, me, everybody.
Then I need to know this right away.
You're gonna die.
Okay, then I need to know this ASAP. All this guy has to say is that this place is dangerous, so I'm starting to think it might be true. Maybe if we hear about it 500 more times. He does ask if Darius has seen a dog around here, which he eventually finds near a small stream. Darius then runs into this guy.
Are there any more survivors? You're walking on dangerous ground. Go somewhere safe. Huh? That mark on your hand. You have the crest. Get away! Ah! The cursed mark!
This is the first time we're introduced to the concept of the crest. You probably saw it on Darius's hand in the promotional artwork and the main menu. It's everywhere. It was such a scary thing for this guy to see on Darius's hand that he fell to his death after noticing it. This crest, apparently, is horrifying to the people of Edinburgh. What the fuck is Darius wearing, by the way? He looks like a bumblebee with scarves. On the way back to the jail cell, Darius runs into this big purple monster. Presumably, this is one of those dangerous monsters we've been hearing so much about. I wish someone would just tell us whether this place was dangerous or not so I don't have to keep guessing.
It doesn't make sense. Why you'd want to go there? Why not just jump off a bridge?
Oh, thank God. This old man mentions that he saw a girl from Solta who was also headed towards the castle. We don't really have much context for the world at this point, but Solta is one of the villages on the continent of Edinburgh. Beyond that, we can pretty easily infer that this old guy is referring to Sharline, who we only know of as the only other character on the character selection screen. This is the first time the world has hinted at Darius and Sharline's stories being connected, and it seems their timelines aren't happening too far apart either. The old man points out Darius's crest, claiming that it's because of Darius that not only was he attacked, but also that Darius caused the downfall of the Rubanian Empire, which is an interesting claim and also a tall claim for a fairy tale land. At the very least, this crest implies association with whatever demonic forces actually destroyed it, and whatever is responsible for the monsters that now inhabit it. All we have to go off of, though, is the stigma associated with bearing the crest. The loading screens reveal a bit more information to us, though. They have little write-ups on certain pieces of Edinburgh's lore. Relevant to our new findings about the crest, one of these write-ups is about a village called Toledo, one of the other villages. It was a small village in the Biliana forest that was destroyed by Morpheus. Children born in Toledo who bore the crest were considered guardians of the Biliana trees and were treated as holy martyrs. Then, another one of these loading screens explains to us a bit about Edinburgh as a continent. Edinburgh has witnessed the rise and fall of many empires, holding a dense forest of Biliana trees within it. It also mentions that children born with the crest are shunned as bringers of tragedy. This now creates a little bit of a conflict. The crest is a bad thing, according to the people we've encountered and the history of Edinburgh, yet the Toledo loading screen is telling us that, within Toledo, the crest grants the bearer guardian status over the Biliana trees as a holy martyr. So we don't actually know whether the crest is a good thing or not. It's kind of ambiguous. Now, what do we do with this information? I don't know yet. There are still more pieces we need to assemble before we can begin to understand the implications of the crest. Let's talk about a cool thing EverGrace does: tricking you with treasure chests. This one, right at the beginning of the Royal Passage, is one of the first in the entire series, and when Darius opens it, this monkey flies out and attaches itself to him, dealing damage over time and also poisoning him, which deals more damage even after it eventually goes away. So you can't trust treasure chests in this game. A really cool design choice.
Thanks, FromSoft.
Beyond its seeding of doubt in my mind, the Royal Passage also introduces the way puzzles are structured in EverGrace. In this case, a switch that's easily accessible, which drops a bridge, allowing Darius access to the next mini-boss. Silver Guy. Tall Silver Guy. This guy drops a piece of Palmyra ore, a very valuable concentrated version of Palmyra worth 1,000 Palmyra pieces. But that's not really the most interesting part of this section. This Royal Passage area is very short-lived in-game, but in the Shimomura novel, this is an entire section where Darius and Chrysalis kind of bond a bit, and it's really cute. Chrysalis teaches Darius how to better use Palmyra armaments, and he learns to cast a fireball. If this was a later PS2 title, I could see plenty of these interactions being within the game rather than being relegated to just the novel. I mean, this is the same console that had Kingdom Hearts. They talked a lot in that game. Gaining access to the actual castle requires finding a couple spheres hidden in birds' nests and placing them on pillars. A simple puzzle that isn't all that interesting, really. This intermediary cliff area between the Royal Passage and the castle itself is pretty neat, though. It makes me wonder why all of Rubain that we've observed so far seems to be floating over a massive empty void or completely surrounded by seemingly infinite oceans. Chrysalis continues to impart this idea of the demon into Darius's mind, still refusing to elaborate on who it actually is. And at this point, I was starting to feel a bit of trepidation regarding Chrysalis's intentions. I no longer really trusted her. The way she talks is too deliberate and withholding. Darius seems indifferent, not being emotionally invested one way or another, but the way she would show up only when it was convenient for her to do so, and then never elaborate on anything she said, was beginning to rub me the wrong way. And whoever this demon is, Chrysalis thinks it best that Darius see it firsthand. There's a lot of significance to this castle that Darius enters, and it all begins with the commander's diary found in one of the lower floor's rooms. These diary entries are essentially documenting the Rubanian Empire's invasion and abduction of a child from Toledo, and immediately after this, Rubain seemed to be thrust into a months-long era of unending day, with a demon being released in an attempt to destroy the Empire. The people are speculating that this is all because of experiments at the lab, from which they've stopped receiving contact. The lab in question is, of course, elaborated on further in its loading screen info. Human Research Lab, a research facility for Biliana trees led by Morpheus, whose research on the crest resulted in the establishment of human science and the development of Palmyra armaments. It supported the growth of the Rubain Empire. Later, Morpheus moved on to research the Allcrest. When I first read the term Human Research Lab, my ears perked up a bit. Human Research Lab is an extremely sinister phrase. Human science has a similar creepy vibe, and it doesn't sound like biology. If it was, they would probably just use that term, so it must be something else. The contrast this term suddenly injects into the pre-modern world of EverGrace as we understand it is jarring. Up until now, we've been exploring a world that worships the Biliana Forest and fears birthmarks. So when the term human research lab appears, it feels completely out of place. The language the story uses suddenly shifts from tradition to methodology, and this stark contrast really stood out to me. Back in the castle, Darius has multiple equipment-based puzzles to complete. This is a trend throughout the entire game, and it really annoyed me. Float over the pink stuff, equip the royal armor set to unlock the chain to access the next boss. Unlike most RPGs in my experience, you kind of need almost every piece of gear and nearly every single weapon in EverGrace to even beat it. One of these weapons is the Olden Warhammer, the coolest weapon in the game. Equipped with this, Darius finds himself at what might be the first true boss on the second floor of the castle. The torso of a woman on a cool snake body with mouth claws. This monster is known as Zenovius. The book has an entire section discussing the royal family of Rubain, with a focus on two characters in particular, Lysimer and Orladin. Lysimer is the daughter of the king, and Orladin is his nephew. There's some stuff I won't go into in this video because it's weird and ultimately results in Lysimer being married off at the age of 9 to a foreign country for political reasons. And 5 years later, at the age of 14, she has a very depressing realization. It was when Lysimer was 14 that she realized it. All women, even the daughter of the king, are simply powerless tools used to further people's goals. And Lysimer is who we fight. In the game, you simply don't get this backstory. It's moments like this where the Shimomura novel really shines, in my opinion, providing context to otherwise meaningless encounters. There's some implication about Lysimer being left behind by her entire family when the Empire fell, so her voice line upon defeat hits particularly hard once you understand the context. As tragic of a character as Lysimer is, she's still defeated easily. And honestly, after learning about her, this boss fight feels far more important than the game makes it out to be. When playing through the game for the first time without this knowledge, I felt like there was something missing to this encounter. And this feeling of emptiness where our modern gaming brains might expect some lore creates a very unsatisfying void. Which is why I think I loved the novels so much. Darius unlocks access to the castle's library after this fight, which reveals to us further lore. The first book is written by one of Rubain's emperors. It tells the story of how Edinburgh has seen the rise and fall of many empires, with a story of one of these empires that vanished overnight. It also talks about how the Biliana tree is a freak of nature. It produces seeds but doesn't grow. It remains in the same shape and form, never changing. The Emperor believed that these trees could grant strange powers, and he wanted them, which led to the creation of the Kingdom of Rubain. The next book outlines the Rubain Empire's conquering of every village and local tribe, except for a small group. When they captured the leader of this group, they discovered that he was a Crestbearer. They know very little about the crest at this point, but were made aware of a scholar who was researching it. The last book goes further in depth into this research, mentioning Morpheus once again by name. It mentions the kidnapping of the child from Toledo once more in pursuit of greater research, but whoever wrote these words expresses some concern about Morpheus beginning to take his experiments too far. Darius heads into the Congregation Chamber's reception hall immediately after this, and it's here that he finds a boy. I think this cutscene contains some of the stronger dialogue in the first game. A lot of RPG dialogue can feel very anime at times, where a lot of words are said for no reason. much like my videos. But I appreciate how, in this case, this demon, known as Dementia, simply states that he's responsible for making sure no humans remain in the Empire, and responds to Darius's question with, "Who cares? Shut up, I'm gonna kill you."
Hey, you! Are you the demon?
Me? The demon? Who cares? I'm here to make sure no humans from the Empire get out alive.
Dementia also lightly implies that he's not the demon Darius is searching for, and that he also answers to a higher power. There's a lot of information conveyed in a relatively concise manner here, which is a rarity for EverGrace. If the entire game was written like this, it might have received higher praise. This boss was a bit nerve-wracking from a gameplay perspective. At this point, I hadn't been back to the shop to restock on the overpowered life elixirs that you can only hold 9 of that heal you completely.
Oh my god, it's like Dark Souls.
Between the cool boss design, the high stakes, and the arguably good cutscenes surrounding it, this encounter ended up being one of the most memorable parts of the game for me. When Darius finally defeats him, Dementia mentions the crest and finally dies.
It's the cursed mark.
And then, with almost zero urgency,
This way. You can escape this way. Come on, hurry.
this woman is known as Sienna. Because we're experiencing Darius's story first, this is our introduction to her. She doesn't have much information for us, though. She reveals that she's also a Crestbearer, which is cool, and is very clearly hiding something further. Darius picks up on this, but Sienna won't reveal any additional information, stating that it's not the time yet or something. Why is she even here, by the way, in the crumbling castle? Also, I thought Dementia was trying to kill all humans. Typical EverGrace vagaries. Chrysalis tells Darius that they need to find the priest here, but oops, turns out the priest isn't here actually, so Darius needs to escape instead. And for all they know, the priest might not even be alive, so I don't really know what we're doing exactly. Nobody's giving Darius any information. Despite this idea that all of these people, Chrysalis included, are supposedly on Darius's side, nobody will share anything with him. The bulk of our knowledge at this point comes from the random books we've encountered and the enemies we've faced. Chrysalis has done a good job directing Darius, but she's done so without any explanation. It's honestly kind of frustrating.
That girl, could she be... Nah, can't be.
Over the next 90 minutes, I struggled to slowly make my way through this giant, empty area, solving puzzles with the mandatory equipment that allow forward progress. In one of the side rooms, labeled The Study, there's another note. "It's terrible. Our empire faces total destruction. The lab's uncontrolled experiments gave birth to the demon. We're trapped. Innocent people have been destroyed. It's the demon. He's everywhere." With no clue as to who the demon might be, this is nothing more than demon hype. Again, you know, that demon this world keeps attempting to prop up as a boogeyman without any real evidence. After spending an unhealthy amount of time in the basement of a crumbling castle, Darius finally solves the weird mirror puzzle, with its admittedly kind of cool enemies, and manages to escape. The Royal Commons leads directly to this door to the Religious Hall. It's the only path to be taken. Within the destroyed hall is a penguin woman, and this conversation is just so bizarre.
Been expecting you.
Huh? We've never met.
No, but I knew you would come.
I don't get it, but that can wait. I have to ask you something. It's really important.
You want to know how to get out of this world and back to your own.
You seem to know many things.
No, I don't know anything.
I don't know why this woman is like, I don't know anything. Here's a bunch of information, but do not ask me if I know anything, but here's some more info. And
No, I don't know anything.
the penguin woman, when she's not talking about how she literally doesn't know anything, goes on to say that the Rubanians worshipped the Biliana trees and mentions the Great Mother. The translation is not great, so it's easy to miss this detail, but the term Mother of All Things is widely used by Edinburgh's citizens to reference the massive, imposing Biliana forest. These trees, and by extension the entirety of the Biliana forest, was already an important element of the story, but this is the first time this precise terminology has been used. Darius is told he needs to meet Morpheus, the man we've heard about time and time again now, who was doing research on humans and the Crest. Sounds like a cool guy.
Members of royalty are scarce. There may be none left alive.
I haven't asked you anything yet.
After the entirety of the Rubane Castle section, it's actually comforting to be back in Saramad Hill. And this feels like an intentional design choice. A contrast between the cold, empty, man-made castle and the comfort of nature. This moment was just fascinating to me. Back at the most dangerous area in the game, Darius finds the old man and his dog.
My castle.
Much to our surprise, or maybe aligned with your expectations, this old man is the emperor of the now fallen Rubane Empire. Known as Nafato III, he was the one to discover that the Crestbearers could use Palmyra armaments safely. Left without an empire, though, he simply wanders through life, questioning why he wasn't also killed along with the others. A nice dose of survivor's guilt for you. Enjoy. In the Shimomura novel, there's a mercenary they refer to as Red Wind. Red Wind was the first example of a Crestbearer who could safely use Palmyra armaments, the one who could take on 100 soldiers, the near-immortal mercenary. After being betrayed by his employer, he was captured by Morpheus and experimented on. Red Wind is the leader of the resistance group mentioned in one of the books in the Rubane Castle library, the small group that they couldn't conquer. When Morpheus began researching further developments in human science, he eventually developed something referred to as the All-Crest, a man-made imitation of the naturally occurring crest. This is another thing we've learned about through the in-game books. The initial motivation for development of the crest, beyond the Empire's apparent desire for control and understanding, is that there weren't enough crest bearers that the Rubanian Empire could find to bolster their army. At this point, they were already in power, but you don't stay in power by becoming complacent. There was one specific moment where the soldiers of Rubane were hunting for crestbearers in Toledo, and they came across a woman. Her husband refused to let her be taken away, and when the soldiers attempted to apply force, something happened. Nobody really knows what exactly, just that the soldiers disappeared. It was after that incident that the Rubane Empire became what it is today. At the moment when the soldiers were about to take the woman away from Toledo, a huge bird of gold emerged from nowhere, as if to punish our empire. Returning to the penguin lady with the royal helmet that Darius received from the emperor, she tells him to stand in front of the statue of the empire's founder.
Thou, who carries on my spirit, show thy privilege to follow in my footsteps.
This battle is tough. Difficulty scaling in old games like this will often either put the required skill floor well above what's to be expected, or start out laughably easy only to become impossibly hard by the end. EverGrace is most certainly the latter, and this is the point at which my skill barely kept pace with the difficulty increase.
I hereby accept thee.
Darius returns to the Penguin and is teleported to an ice cavern with the direction that there's a coliseum behind it that he has to reach. Before departing, there are a few words we're given.
I've completed my duties, my time. That cursed mark, the crest. By itself, it doesn't bring misfortune. It's all caused by...
It might not be a great idea to trust the lady who constantly reminds us how little she knows, but this is important. It's the first time anyone within the world has even implied that the crest isn't inherently dangerous. While everyone else is discussing how the crest brings with it misfortune, the Penguin has other thoughts. The ice cavern overall is a pretty short area with some weird movement quirks and a relatively simple puzzle.
Running, I'm sprinting. Look how fast. Just on the tippy toes.
Of course, the final puzzle requires Darius to equip the correct pieces of armor. This is something they really loved to make you do. And I'll tell you right now, this equip the correct pieces of armor puzzle design continues throughout the second game as well. This is where the lance is, though, and that very quickly became my new favorite weapon. It goes against the canon of the Shimomura novel, where Darius is often using the olden warhammer, but that thing sucks. It always did suck too, by the way. Finding something I liked more means the last thing I like always sucked. There are a number of creatures Darius defeats on his way to the center of the Colosseum, and this is where arguably the single most important cutscene in the entire series happens.
Look there, Darius. That old man is Morpheus. Quick, get him! Darius!
Huh? Sharline? How could this be? No. This can't be. It's impossible. She died when I killed her.
I'm sorry. Fucking what?
All this time, I was wondering how Sharline and Darius's stories connected in any way. I figured we'd find out eventually, but what I didn't expect to learn was that people die when they're killed. Unless they exist within EverGrace's story, in which case, who the fuck knows what's going on? This was yet another pivotal moment in the story for me. Beyond the cheesy line delivery, my ears perked up once again at this moment, much in the same way they did when I first learned about the Human Research Lab. I wasn't totally convinced I would be making a video about this series up until this point, but once I heard that, the first domino fell. After this, my interest in the story skyrocketed and I began to pay a lot more attention. There have been underlying themes of loss and trauma, but this is the moment the game decided to more explicitly state these themes, and I became deeply interested. When Darius finally makes his way to the center of the Colosseum, we see this boy once more, the one who had previously turned into a monster that we killed. But we've also learned that people don't die when they're killed in EverGrace. We see that bright yellow light once more, which we can now infer as a power of the crest, and the old guy remarks that it's better than he'd expected.
Margin making all this noise?
You! What did you do to her?
Shouldn't you introduce yourself before you start demanding answers?
Answer the question!
No! You answer mine!
He hit him with the unblockable "no you," and the old man, the child, and Sharline all disappear. This is yet another boss whose attacks are completely unavoidable, and I'm not entirely sure who this is meant to be. Possibly just another random monster. Darius falls through the floor like in Tekken, and we find ourselves in another cutscene while Darius is unconscious.
I'm sorry I brought you into this, but this is your... Darius! Are you okay?
Darius springs back up with no complaints beyond it simply being too hot in the lava zone. He fell from probably hundreds of feet and suffered literally no damage. Kind of interesting. To get through this area, Darius has to find 2 azure spheres. In pursuit of this, he comes across this dying guy in a cave.
Another one fooled by that old fox Morpheus.
You're wounded.
I know. I guess this is it for me. I'm not ready to go.
You're wounded. I know. He mentions that he just met a nice girl who he then asks Darius to save before she becomes a guinea pig for Morpheus. He mentions the girl by name actually, Sharline, and this whole conversation feels so unnaturally casual considering the circumstances.
You know her?
You guys are inside a volcano.
He gives Darius one of the orbs, and when he asks if Darius is related to Sharline, Darius replies with this.
I caused her misfortune.
You think Dying Guy might get a little upset at that reveal, but he doesn't really have anything to say about it. The next orb is located over a lava bridge that requires a specific Palmyra armament to reach, yet more mandatory gear puzzles. It makes sense that they want to utilize as many of the elements of the game as possible, and I don't really think it's fair to criticize this particular use of it so much. It's kind of cool to float over lava like this. The boss of the abandoned road is pretty tough. It requires use of magical Palmyra armaments, and I didn't have a ton of those at my disposal, so this fight took quite a long time. I even ran out of durability on my equipment in the middle of it. Beyond simply being like a cool freaking sweet genre of music, this fruit core holds the heavenly axe with an engraved message on the hilt. To our savior, from your eternal friend. Sienna, the woman we last saw at the crumbling castle, is inexplicably within the fruit core, reminiscing about this fallen Crestbearer warrior.
Have you ever thought about the crest, what it means, what it does? Death and tragedy for others hound you wherever you go. That won't change in this world or your own.
What are you saying?
People exist in a constant flow. They get carried along by the flow, and they struggle to break free. Same goes for bearers of the crest. But when a crest bearer struggles, they make currents in the flow, and people get swallowed up by them. Even bearers of the crest can get swallowed up. Its very existence is a plague. That's what the crest is.
This flow analogy is pretty cool and very accurate, and it seems Sienna has some kind of personal history with it. Pragmatic Darius doesn't really seem to care, though. He's still focused on finding Morpheus. As this woman lifts up her hand, we see the same bright yellow light we've now observed multiple times from crest bearers.
Very strong.
Thanks, Mom. The door directly in front of Darius is labeled Laboratory Entrance. There are a number of puzzles to complete, most of which are color-based equipment puzzles. One thing that really stood out to me in the soaring tower was the mysterious empty room behind a destroyed wall. There's no monster or treasure chest or anything of note in this little room, so I don't know why it's here. Darius becomes the blue gentleman for the next color puzzle, and the statue teleports him to the lower part of the soaring tower. He's blue for an amazing reason. This area is similarly straightforward, mostly combat, but there is a library here that holds a huge amount of lore. My favorite. A lot of it is the usual, we fucked up, the experimentation birthed the demon, and now we're all gonna die stuff that we've heard a bunch of times now. Who cares? This is when the Alcrest is first explained, a quasi-crest that can recreate certain elements of the real crest. The last book implies that the crest has the power to cut away the world and mentions a gruesome pillar. It seems to further imply that there's a group within Rubain who now wish to maintain the status quo of the Biliana Forest, despite Morpheus's unrelenting research that they can see is leading them to destruction. These two phrases, though, the power to cut away the world and gruesome pillar, are by far the most important. After solving the photosynthesis reactor puzzle, Darius interacts with the statue, once more finding himself in the upper level of the soaring tower. Chrysalis informs Darius that this will be his toughest challenge yet, though this claim is a bit overblown. The entire area is kind of a pit of trials, something you'd find in a Paper Mario or a Zelda game. It's just a huge series of fights that take a long time to get through. There are different monsters with varying strengths and weaknesses that tests game knowledge and battle skills pretty thoroughly. It's clear that this is a prelude to the finale, and it's pretty fun. There's a room with a blonde girl and a cutscene, the two things it holds within it. She tells us to leave her alone despite being trapped like Crystal from Star Fox Adventures, which I find is a very bizarre response to a hero arriving for someone who's very clearly trapped. She only wants us to leave her alone so we don't get hurt. We can't get anything else out of her though. There's one Palmyra armament that I really enjoyed, which is the Sprint. And I'm good at it too. Finally, at the end of the upper soaring tower, there's another fire lava boss, and I fell into the lava way too many times for someone who has played this game for multiple hours at this point. According to Chrysalis, Morpheus is right above us. I don't really understand why it seems as though everyone besides Darius knows exactly where Morpheus is at all times, and Darius is just being guided to him. Upon entering Morpheus's secret lab, Darius finds Sharline locked behind glass doors. We find out that the boy we've seen a couple times now, the one who transformed into a demon and clearly has crest powers, is named Trandon and was another victim of Morpheus's.
You creep.
There's a quick boss fight, but with the gear Darius has at this point, it's pretty easy. Morpheus, for all his power, is still relatively weak and falls quickly. That woman appears suddenly once more, talking about the cycle of the world. And this is where it's finally revealed to us. Sienna is the demon the texts have been referencing up until now. In a continued monologue directed at Sienna, Morpheus reveals that Trandon is now at a place called the Land of All Ends. And this is also where we find out that Trandon is Sienna's son. So my little joke earlier about Sienna's dialogue sounding like a mom talking to her child was actually kind of weird foreshadowing. I swear I wrote that before I learned this. Morpheus goes on to pass all blame to Sienna, which probably isn't right based on what we know about him. Morpheus disappears and Darius asks what we're all thinking at this point.
What's going on? What's happening?
The story just ends. The next step is getting through Sharline's story. The important elements to note here are Sienna's mention of the cycle and her reveal as the demon who destroyed Rubain, the power to cut away the world, and the fact that Rubain was thrust into an unending day after abducting Trandon from Toledo. If Sienna was truly some kind of demonic malicious entity though, why has she been on our side up until now? It's definitely possible Darius is just being used, but there's no real answer to this quite yet. From this point onward, the story of EverGrace is told backwards. It's actually very heavily backloaded, which is to say we learn about something that already happened and then go back in the timeline to further elaborate on it. That's how the entire world of EverGrace works, and it can be a little confusing at first. I'll do my best to keep the world intact in your mind without too many loose threads.
Rubain! In the blink of an eye, the world was conquered by the strongest military empire with magical Palmyra armaments. Lost Empire! The empire flourished, but suddenly it vanished without a trace. All that remained was a legend and the Biliana forest. Everything was cast into darkness. I was telling this fairy tale to that young boy. but a terrible thing occurred. I wanted to help him, the boy who gazed sadly at his own hands. So
Sharline wakes up on a bed with no memory in FromSoft's strongest attempt to avoid JRPG tropes. Her first instinct is to ask where Darius is. Instead of an answer, though, Sienna tells Sharline that she found her in the forest, presumably rescuing her from something.
What's your name?
Sharline?
Sharline? Oh, what a pretty name. I'm Sienna.
The voice acting differences between characters is probably most apparent at this point. It's very funny how Sharline sounds like a character from You're Under Arrest, juxtaposed against Sienna, who sounds like she might actually just be a mom they put in front of a microphone.
What?
Please, wait here a second.
The way these two talk makes it clear that they know each other, which feels weird knowing what we know about them.
Sienna, you haven't changed at all.
This is where we get a glimpse of Trandon's powers as he destroys the entire cabin, but he stops this destruction when Sienna yells at him. It seems there's still some humanity within Trandon. Sienna goes on to imply that she brought Sharline into all of this, lamenting the idea that she'll never escape the curse of the crest. I guess my biggest question is simply why the power dynamic between Morpheus and Sienna seems to be the way it is. Trandon under Morpheus's control, with Sienna around to observe, but unable to do anything about it in a post-Rubanian Empire world. It's kind of hard to wrap my head around.
Stop it! I'm sorry. So sorry I brought you into all this.
The three of them disappear, leaving Sharline alone in the middle of the forest, but Sharline appears to know what this crest stuff is all about.
Crest? She said crest. I've got to help her.
Back in the now destroyed cabin, there's a journal with a few entries that describe someone finding a girl in the forest. People lying in the forest. I should be used to it by now. This also finally informs us who the penguin lady is. A priest. That reveal doesn't sound as good as I expected it to. I'm gonna keep calling her the penguin. Sharline meets the penguin, who is surprised that anyone is still alive. Much like Darius, Sharline has no idea where she is. As we know, she's in the Royal Commons. The penguin elaborates further on what the Royal Commons is, a resting place of the rulers of the Rubane Empire. Sharline knows the Rubane Empire as the Lost Empire, referring to its history as a fairy tale much in the same way Darius did. The penguin really latches onto the word lost, further stating that yes, indeed, many precious lives have been lost to the beasts that now inhabit the kingdom. And Sharline's response to this tangent is very funny to me. She's so direct.
I'm sorry, but I'm not talking about that. I mean, what about the fairy tale you were talking about?
This cutscene, as well as Sharline's backstory, really cements her characterization for the first time. Sharline's entire purpose, as well as her unrelenting drive, simply stems from her desire to help others. Similar to Darius's own characterization, with a different driving force. Sharline wants to find Sienna to help her, but doesn't have enough orientation to even begin doing so. After a few lines from the penguin that sound like that big talking head from Darkseid 2.
To be sorry. To be producing power infected with random magnetic fluxes.
Sharline is directed towards Saramat Hill, which is now regarded as the only remaining safe area. According to the penguin. We know that's not true. The first thing we see is that the pillar that was fallen in Darius's story is still intact at this point. I think I've mentioned it already, but this is yet more confirmation that Sharline's story does indeed take place before Darius. Further solidifying this timeline, Sharline talks to Nafato III. He's still alive and still weird. His first thought contradicts the Penguin's assertion that Saramad Hill is safe.
What are you doing here? It's dangerous. Do you wish to die? That might not be such a bad idea.
What? I told you, he's still weird. He's apparently looking for a flower to put on this guy's corpse. Presumably the fallen swordman, though even with all my knowledge, I'm not entirely sure who it's supposed to be. He won't let Sharline take the sword either, which is fucked up.
What are you doing? What are you?
In Darius's story, there was a flower floating on the water that we specifically were not allowed to pick up because there was only one remaining at the time. EverGrace does this quite often, and apparently when taking notes, I thought these moments that convey continuity between the stories were interesting and worth mentioning for some reason. Yes, Sharline's story takes place before Darius's. We get it. Sharline brings this flower to Nafato III, which causes him to open up and reveal more information. Sharline mentions that she's from Solta, which Nafato is very surprised by.
This world is sealed from the outside. You can't possibly have come from Solta.
Remember earlier how the books in one of the libraries in Darius's story mentioned the crest had the power to cut away the world? Well, this is the first time the idea of the Rubanian Empire being cut off from the rest of Edinburgh is mentioned, and I didn't pick up on this at first. Nafato III is a lot nicer to Sharline than he ever was to Darius, giving her a pendant that she'll need later. He also says that Sharline looks a bit like his daughter, who we know to be Lysimer, the poor girl who was transformed into a monster.
You look a bit like my daughter. She's dead now. That pendant has an inscription that says it will take you beyond the passage of the three.
Okay. This game has a very unfortunate habit of delivering really heavy pieces of information in unintentionally funny ways. I know you didn't ask, but my daughter? Yeah, she's dead. Here's an item you need for progression. This information matters a little bit, but is just so poorly delivered, much like Darius mentioning how he supposedly killed Sharline. It kind of undermines the emotion behind the words. Running around Saramad Hill further looking for stuff to collect, Sharline eventually comes across the dog. He leads her to a mini-boss fight for a Palmyra ore. Sharline literally one-shots it because I spent 2 hours grinding her stats up. And then the pillar falls. As Sharline uses the Sword Star pendant to access the area with the statue of the founder, she finds the penguin standing in front of it. Her only purpose here seems to be guiding Sharline wherever she wants to go, as though Sharline is supposed to know where she wants to go at this point. Her only direction is finding Sienna, which is definitely too vague to specify a location. So much of the direction these characters head in feels so surreal, as though they have no idea what the hell is happening at any given point. They're just shuffled along by other entities who seem to always have their own motivations and are using Sharline and Darius as pawns. This is something I was very cognizant of by this point. The statue of the founder teleports Sharline to the Human Research Lab. Finally, after so much time spent reading about it, we get to see it ourselves. Sharline gains access to the late-game speed shoes that Darius only received in the Soaring Tower, which was exceptionally helpful for the large and complex Human Research Lab. Sharline's goal is to activate the transport device in the middle of the lab. I don't really understand why this is her goal, but at this point I really should just accept that there's no explanation for forward progression beyond inertia. The characters see their next location in front of them and decide, okay, I need to go do that now, without a long-term plan of any sort beyond find Morpheus or find Sienna. Sharline runs into this dead guy who has a Billiana fruit on him. As a character, she comes across as very educated, so when she receives this fruit, it's easy to believe that she understands its importance. That's not my issue with this encounter. What creeps me out about this is that this corpse looks identical to the guy in Darius's story who fell off a cliff early on in Saramad Hill. It's like the exact same character model. It's really unsettling, and I think this was intentional since every other character model in the game is unique. Based on the size of the data on the disc, FromSoft clearly wasn't running into any technical limitations with this, so this was very likely a deliberate decision, and that makes it even more confusing. Anyway, Sharline finds the master key and runs into the dying guy that Darius encountered in the abandoned road. He's here now for some reason. Sharline tries to heal him, and I'm confused by this. She obviously has some kind of healing powers, but it's not disclosed whether these are magic or if she just used a first aid kit. What we do know for certain is that it's not crest related. Up until now, every time the crest's power has been utilized, there was an accompanying bright yellow glow, which is not present in this instance. I was worried for a moment because Sharline is not a Crestbearer. There's zero indication of this at any point, so if she suddenly had crest powers, I don't even want to think about that. This is where we finally find out who this dying guy is, Orladin, the nephew of the king whose history I briefly outlined during Darius's time in the castle. The Shimomura novel and the game deviate pretty heavily from one another in this regard. In the novel, Orladin travels with Darius and a few other people. But in the game's telling of events, Orladin is just a dying character who Sharline and Darius both encounter separately. I didn't really know how to reconcile this contradiction in my mind, so this is one of the instances where I deferred to one canon over the other, kind of subjectively. With the master key in hand, Sharline manages to make her way to one of my favorite rooms in the game, another library. This is almost entirely information we know already. The only detail that's elaborated on is that Palmyra is extract from fruit of the Biliana trees, and that Palmyra enhances human strength, though it seems not everyone can wield it. The last two books are mostly gameplay related. One explains that transport Palmyra, an implementation of Palmyra's powers that allow teleportation, used to be a time-consuming process to create that is now simplified by the refinery solution they utilize in the lab. The final book is just more information about Morpheus's research going too far and releasing monsters everywhere in the process. Did you know he did that? Sharline eventually finds Morpheus in the commander's room and demands to know where Sienna is.
Morpheus, where is Sienna?
Huh? Why do you care? Sienna has nothing to do with you.
Wrong. She does have something to do with me. I need to ask her something.
I just love these interactions. Sharline believes that Sienna knows about her past and might be able to provide a way for Sharline to return to Solta.
First the crest, then now the cycle.
Morpheus summons a giant dog. He drops one of the best weapons in the game that I absolutely loved, way better than the stupid Lancer thing that Darius had. The Sacred Rod. This thing is the best, and I pretty much used it for the rest of Sharline's story. Sharline refines the Biliana fruit she found into transport Palmyra using the machines located in one of the rooms, and teleports to the Human Research Lab's first floor in pursuit of Morpheus. You know, they could have just used stairs or invented an elevator, but I guess that's not cool enough for the Rubanian Empire. The entire first floor of the Human Research Lab is one gigantic element and equipment puzzle. Tree seal with the giant tree behind it. Ice seal with the ice room behind it, lightning seal with a big lightning pillar behind it, flame seal with the flame pillar behind it. Using all of the proper elemental Palmyra armaments destroys the seals and whatever is contained within the room behind them, and this finally grants Sharline access to another transport symbol. In this unnamed room, Sharline encounters that blonde girl from Darius's story, the one who wouldn't explain anything. For the sake of context, I'm just going to tell you that her name is Medina. I don't really understand why the game withholds that information, despite making it clear that Medina is Morpheus's granddaughter. It's like, we know that she's his granddaughter, but we don't know her first name. When Sharline tells her she's looking for Morpheus, Medina seems to be willing to help, remotely activating another transport device for Sharline to use. Much like Chrysalis's characterization, Medina's character is greatly expanded on in the Shimomura novel. She comes across very defeated and apathetic in the game, like she was exposed to something and it ripped away all of her hope and desire to go on, like she's just existing, floating through the world whether she likes it or not. It also doesn't help that we only ever see her trapped in these bizarre cages and behind doors that require special teleportation fruit to access. In the Shimomura novel, Medina's role is far greater. I'll try my best to explain this since it's kind of confusing chronologically. So, Medina saves Darius after an important encounter. This event happens pretty early in the Shimomura novel, but I've saved discussion for that until the end of the first game's section. Medina is seriously ill and explains to Darius that without the research into the All-Crest, she would have died. Morpheus researched it to save her and went on to do terrible things with the knowledge he gained. It was part of his initial motivation. He gave Medina the All-Crest, granting her the mystical Palmyra powers that we're so familiar with now, and keeping her alive. One of the bad things Morpheus did, however, was kidnap Trandon from Toledo, whether by his own hand or by use of a soldier. Medina was like an older sister to Trandon and hated that he was treated as a lab rat by Morpheus, who also keeps the two of them separate now. It's an interesting concept to me, because it actually kind of gives Morpheus's character a little bit more depth. He desperately wanted to keep his granddaughter alive, but is now holding her captive in places where she can't be harmed with no regard for her happiness. Obviously, this is still extremely selfish, and knowing this doesn't make him any less of a bad guy, of course. He's very much still in the red morally. But I like that the novel went out of its way to frame him as almost a person, someone we could maybe relate to, even if he still kind of went crazy. Trandon was taken away in order to bring out the crest-branded parent bird. If that's not the single most revealing and unnatural phrasing of all time, I don't know what would qualify for that title. Medina goes on to tell Darius that she helped Sharline, which we just observed in-game because of Sharline's backstory. We don't see this conversation happen, but Medina learns that Sharline felt powerless to protect someone in her past, the boy she mentions in her opening monologue who bore the crest. This mirrored back Medina's own feelings precisely, and because she was now completely powerless, she decided to help Sharline, who might be able to achieve what she always wished she could. So we now have a few more of the pieces. The crest-branded parent bird is a pretty obvious connection between Sienna, Trandon's mother, and Chrysalis. Chrysalis is Sienna in bird form. I know that doesn't make much sense, but the Shimomura novel explains this a bit. When the destruction of Toledo occurred, it was a woman with the crest who transformed, her body glowing yellow, and it was reported that she'd taken a shape resembling a bird. Chrysalis had been referring to herself as the demon. It's kind of unclear whether Chrysalis and Sienna are the same entity, or if they're actually separate and can exist in the same location at the same time. This also means that Sienna had effectively been with Darius throughout his entire story, but this characterization of Sienna as a demon is patently false. There's no indication at any point that she's done anything wrong. All she's been doing is protecting herself and her family. So the terminology of demon is very cleverly misleading. It's effectively propaganda we've been fed from the Rubanian Empire, who, as far as I can tell, are the actual bad guys. Sharline is then teleported to the underground research facility, the lower section of the human research lab, with music that sounds like I'm saving my Animal Crossing game. There's a small section of cave that leads to a cool accessory, but this entire area consists primarily of just 2 puzzles that are connected via a slowly rotating platform in the middle. Sharline has to become blue and equip a bow to acquire the left wing key, but the right wing key is slightly more involved. After floating over the Super Mario Sunshine goop, Sharline reaches the mirror room, which contains 4 reflections of her who must be defeated to unlock the room to the right wing key. This is interesting symbolism, I'm sure, but I'm not experienced enough with interpreting these things that I can really reach any conclusions about these mirror Sharlines, unfortunately. The door that the winged keys unlock leads to a completely empty room with a single chair. Sitting in this chair is Sienna in a kind of lifelike puppet state. Morpheus's voice can be heard and Sienna comes to life, attacking Sharline. Inexplicably, Sharline's Palmyra armaments are sealed now, but she must defeat Sienna. This is a pretty scary fight, but ultimately it's not too hard.
This is cataclysmic indeed. There, it's done. I accept it. You're the real thing.
What are you babbling about?
And Sharline finds herself in the abandoned road on a very similar, albeit accelerated path as Darius. It's essentially the exact same thing with the orbs and stuff. You know, this isn't in the script, but I'm thinking it right now. It doesn't make sense that Sharline can use Palmyra armaments if Palmyra can only be wielded by Crestbearers. I don't think there's ever an explanation for this, but as much as I have spent time processing this story, there are still things like this that I don't fully understand. There's an interesting concept that is consistently conveyed in EverGrace that I picked up on, and it's a little weird. When Sharline uses a crush weapon, usually a hammer or similar blunt weapon, she has to wield it with 2 hands and literally falls down after hitting anything. Darius, on the other hand, can easily use crush weapons without falling over. This is far from a one-off concept in this series of women being physically weaker than men, and although we only get a small sample size of only a number of characters, I thought it was weird that almost every female character in EverGrace is portrayed as physically weaker than their male counterparts. It brought to mind the history of Street Fighter, actually, and how female characters in those games have historically been designed with less health. Because they must be weak because they're women? I don't understand this. We'll talk about it more later. On the bright side, Sharline finds a new bow, which I immediately fully upgraded, and she places both orbs on their respective pedestals. There's no boss in Sharline's story, so she simply gets to walk forward to the fruit core. And this is where we meet Red Wind. He pushes us into another boss fight, but with Sharline's maxed stats and the sacred rod, he fell easily. After the massive amount of experiments that were performed on him by Morpheus, Red Wind is understandably kind of hateful of the crest he was born with. There's not much else he reveals at this point, but with his dying wish, he teleports Sharline to the land, as he calls it. He's weirdly vague with a few of his statements. I do think it's neat that his final pose is the exact state in which Darius later finds him, but Sharline has now been whisked away to the Soaring Tower. Much like Darius's time in the Soaring Tower, Sharline has more equipment puzzles to solve. There's a tall red guy who drops the treasure key, and on the way towards this boss room, this monster breaks down the wall. The same wall that I noticed in Darius's story was inexplicably destroyed with an empty, meaningless room contained within it. I thought that was neat. After another dumb equipment puzzle, the statue is repaired using a piece Sharline finds in a chest, and she's sent to the lower part of the Soaring Tower. This is, again, very similar to what we saw with Darius's story, so I set off to find the Forest of Knowledge as quickly as possible, which is a cool guy term for library. I thought it was cool that the game referred to it as the Forest of Knowledge. Whatever, I put it in the script. The first paper is titled World Isolation Research Report. The Rubanian Empire conducts research and finds that the Empire is contained within a sphere-like object, and that it's unclear how the crest is connected to the situation. It also says that Morpheus's conclusion was that it's God's will, and the paper states, "That's too abstract. Research has failed to verify his assumption." Sorry guys, our research has failed to verify that God exists. These researchers were really full of themselves. This is not the first time it's been implied that the Empire is contained within some kind of firmament, but it's really cool to learn that the researchers eventually became aware of this. There's another entry about the photosynthesis reactor, which is mostly only relevant to gameplay, but there are also a couple more interesting passages. So, at some point the human research lab was relocated. The new lab is located in a tower that the paper describes as extremely rigid, but the interior resembles a living thing, such as a tree vein or the core of a fruit. The imagery associated with this new tower is interesting, evoking similarities to the bilionotrees that we know as exceptionally important. You can't really get much more on the nose than that, especially since the researchers don't even know why the tower exists. The last paper is the Allcrest Development Report, which just contains mostly uninteresting info about how they're researching the crest, but it ends in a great way. Comment: the purpose of this experiment is still unknown. Please clarify. I don't know what these researchers were on by this point, but they gotta get it together. That's all the library has for us, so Sharline continues on, completing the photosynthesis puzzle and clearing the big golem boss. In the upper floors of the soaring tower, Sharline runs through the same gauntlet that Darius encounters, but she's way stronger, so it's easy. Upon reaching the door where Medina was being held like Crystal from Star Fox Adventures, the only thing Sharline has to say is, "It feels like a source of great power is controlling events." And I think she's talking about the cycle. There's an Ice Guy boss later on in the soaring tower, but because Sharline is insanely strong and her bow is fire element, this is maybe one of the easiest bosses in the game. Sharline finally reaches Morpheus's secret lab. There's no boss fight this time though, just Sienna trapped behind the glass of trapping. In her unending and relentless desire to help everyone, Sharline refuses to run away, even after Sienna warns her. Trandon emerges from another door, and then Sienna's crest begins glowing, to Morpheus's surprise. For some reason. Does he not know Sienna is a Crestbearer? Even Sharline recognizes this bright yellow glow as being the same as Darius. I find it hard to believe Morpheus would be surprised in the slightest by this development.
Oh no! If this keeps up, I'm done!
And that's the end of Sharline's story. With both Sharline and Darius's stories told, we move into the final story. Sienna reveals that she brought Darius here to Rubain for her own selfish needs. We still don't really know what she means by that though, even if we were able to pick up on this manipulation already. Sharline is freed and Darius is reunited with her.
Must purify me.
According to my wishes.
Kill me before.
Crestbearer. Break of the cycle.
I can't go.
Do it.
There are now 2 portals created leading to the 2 final boss fights, one for each character. Darius fights Sienna in her chrysalis form, with more information about the cycle.
This is the fruit that spoils the cycle. This one should have vanished so long ago. There is no salvation. Doesn't work.
When Chrysalis is defeated, all she has to say is, "Blessings on you." It's then Sharline's turn to take on the other boss, Trandon in the Land of All Ends, an area that appears to be an endless field of flowers. Trandon as a character never really speaks. It's part of his lore as a villager from Toledo. It possibly also has something to do with him being under Morpheus's control. At this moment, however, he finally has something to say. And if you thought the bad voice acting was over, well...
Mom,
Yes, that was very clearly meant to be read as Mom My. These poor voice actors must have literally been given zero direction or context. Like, how do you make that mistake otherwise? Moving past the botched reading, this is very sad. All this time and destruction, and that's all he could say. Sienna collapses and apologizes to Sharline. Sienna clearly had a major role in these events, and she seems optimistic that the crest will eventually become a symbol of hope. She uses a bit of vague language, and while her words do hold answers, they don't really make sense.
Darius, I couldn't do it, but you can. Because you're not alone. Not like me. The quest will someday be a symbol of hope. With the last of my dying powers,
Sienna!
Thank you. I saved Sharline thanks to you. All because of your help.
Thank you, Darius. If the cycle permits, we'll meet again someday. For now, goodbye.
Sienna! Oh no, Sienna!
The final cutscene leading into the credits sequence is heavy. I don't know what it is, but FromSoft has this ability to create very aesthetically pleasing and emotionally heavy visuals right at the end of these games. And this could be due to a number of factors. But there's those warm colors again, a consistent motif with EverGrace. This leads into the credits, and the game leaves us with no answers for the story. Lucky for you, I have those answers. Before that, however, I want to talk about the Shadow Tower. While this is also the title of a FromSoft game on the PS1, in the context of EverGrace, it's the name of a hidden dungeon that houses a couple interesting things. The primary point of interest here for our discussion of the story is the final boss, Demon Darius.
Give her back to me!
There's some speculation as to what Demon Darius represents, but in my mind it's pretty obvious. Demon Darius is Darius's inner demon, him as a child, the guilt he carries about his past and the incident with Sharline. I don't know if Demon Darius is canon necessarily, but I really do appreciate the imagery of literally fighting one's inner demon. Then there's something that's a bit more complex. Remember earlier when I discussed Medina and how she saved Darius from a specific threat? That threat is what I like to refer to as Shadow Sharline, thanks to the translator of the novels. I don't think this is in the game anywhere, but in the Shimomura novel, there's an entire section dedicated to this encounter Darius has with this evil version of Sharline within the Shadow Tower. Shadow Sharline tries to kill Darius to make up for him accidentally killing her, which I'm not sure if I've mentioned it already, but I understand it doesn't make sense that Sharline is dead and then perfectly alive in the rest of the story, but it's okay, we'll get to that, kind of, I think. She fires arrows at him and he doesn't try to dodge, he simply takes it. He just doesn't fight back, knowing that he owes his life to Sharline. He quickly finds reason to live, however, when he hears Sharline's voice in his head, telling him that, despite whatever guilt he feels, there's no way the real Sharline would ever blame him like this. He runs away from Shadow Sharline, finds the Moonlight Sword at the base of a Billiana tree, and passes out after a gray fruit of light appears. And yes, it's the FromSoft Moonlight Sword you're thinking of. The themes of loss and guilt are probably the strongest emotional thread tying me to the world of EverGrace personally. I don't know that this story will resonate with you the same way it does for me. I also don't know that its complex turns and obscure story beats feel worth your time inhabiting if you don't see yourself in its world. Oh, and don't worry, it only gets heavier from here. I want to thank Sureshire for posting the unlockable story on GameFAQs. They mentioned the off chance that somebody sometime would be interested in knowing what the story and character sections contain, so they went out of their way to share it. Me, I'm the somebody. The mother of all things is the Biliana Forest. Crestbearers are the chosen ones born as peacekeepers to protect the balance of power. The crest is an indicator that a person was chosen by the Mother of all things to perform purification. Crestbearers don't have control over their crest until an inciting incident occurs in their life to activate it. The Shimomura novel further expands on the idea of chrysalis, explaining that the term chrysalis is not a proper noun. It's not someone's name, it's the term used to refer to these golden floating bird things, of which there are more than one. Then we learn of Sienna's fallibility. Sienna, as a crestbearer, was sent to purify the Rubanian Empire. Purification of Rubain, as dictated by the Mother of all things, essentially means complete destruction. The Rubanian Empire was cut off from the rest of the world, presumably because the Mother of all things was unhappy with its research and creation of the Isle Crest, as well as the general destruction it caused. Because Trandon was captured by Morpheus prior to Rubain's separation from the rest of the world, purification involves killing her own son, and she simply can't do this. Her guilt surrounding this purification process leads to her resisting the will of the Mother of all things, going against her role as a peacekeeper of Edinburgh who maintains the balance. Sienna, though I don't fully understand why, is under Morpheus's control in Sharline's story. She manages to escape this with Sharline's help, but she can't escape the will of the Mother of all things for long. Her consciousness is taken from her, and Sienna uses the last of her power to bring Darius into the Rubanian Empire. It's around the time that he arrives that Sienna becomes Chrysalis, a being whose only goal is to lead Darius to Morpheus. Occasionally, the will of the Mother of all things weakens, which canonically allows Chrysalis's consciousness to return to Sienna for a short period, but she never tells Darius the truth, fearing that he won't help her if he knows her motivations. However, because of Sharline's presence, Darius would have no choice but to assist Chrysalis, even if she did decide to inform him of what was going on. Sienna is wholly controlled by the crest at this point. The final words left with us to wrap up the story are, "When struggling, a crest-bearer makes currents in the flow." That's a lot to unpack, but it ties the whole world together, finally. In the Shimomura novel, the concept of the cycle is expanded on further. Darius is shown a complete cycle by Sienna in chrysalis form, who we can essentially interpret as God at this point. She shows him a world that seems to evolve and fall before his very eyes, a world that exists as a single isolated entity, from nature to a walled city to a small village. This village, much like the Rubanian Empire did to Toledo, is invaded. The villagers are killed one by one, and the only person who remains is a single girl. This girl, speaking in a language that nobody can understand, says one recognizable word: crest. The girl's crest glows, she becomes a golden wolf, and the entire army is killed instantly. The golden wolf runs away and disappears into nothingness. The entire land is decimated by this encounter, leaving behind only a small glowing green light floating above the land. As if trying to fill in a wound, the Biliana forest fills the land, and that small light has taken on a recognizable shape on the branch of a great Biliana tree, Biliana fruit. The new Biliana trees sprout life in all forms: people, animals, plants, and it seems as though everything begins anew. This part of the Shimomura novel was difficult to process, admittedly. The cycle reflecting the cycle of life within Edinburgh, and the Biliana Forest being an allegory for God. Beings are born and they eventually die. However, when anything arises that harms the balance of nature, Crestbearers, born through the will of the Biliana Forest itself, isolate and destroy the threat, keeping the cycle intact. This is how I understand it, at least. And it's in the novel that we get the conclusion to this Rubanian Empire purification process. Darius, frustrated by Siena's inaction, takes it upon himself to complete the cycle. With a cry, Darius swung the sword down, piercing the ground below as the light grew larger and larger, the golden light that shone as bright as the sun, then into a flash of white, and then everything melted away into nothing. I think it's interesting the way this cycle works. Yes, it mirrors our own world in that things are born and then die, but the inclusion of the Crestbearers as peacekeepers who keep in check the balance of power is fascinating. These Crestbearers are usually simply born and placed into the world as it exists, expected to figure out their purpose entirely on their own unless given direct influence by the mother of all things, and not all of them achieve higher purpose, as we observed with Red Wind being captured by Morpheus. So you have this concept of the mother of all things creating a sort of natural defense mechanism against power imbalance that she doesn't seem to always have control over. Crestbearers are certainly difficult to kill, as we know, but not all of them can be the savior of Edinburgh. Sometimes they just live normal lives and aren't particularly special. I think that's a cool way to write characters who effectively have superpowers granted to them by God. That's kind of cool. So EverGrace's story is complex. There are plenty of elements that don't wrap up neatly, like the ambiguity surrounding what exactly turns a Crestbearer into a chrysalis, or why Sharline is back. I have spent hundreds of hours trying to process this stuff now, and I think this brings us to the end of the first game and the Shimomura novel. Darius completes the cycle, and everything comes to an end. I think as a story, EverGrace is satisfying enough with the idea of Darius being the one to finally complete the cycle. The story can be done, no more needs to be expressed, and for me, that's where it does end, thematically. The Shimomura novel, however, decided to go a step beyond this. Without diving into it too much, mostly because I truly just don't understand it, Darius and Sharline return to their world and begin building a new life and a new village. It's really nice. Sharline being present in the Rubanian Empire is something I'm willing to believe. There seems to be a temporal explanation that acts as the logic behind this. And with Siena's god powers that allow her to bring people into her world, fine. Maybe Sharline can exist. I haven't really questioned that very much up until now because I kind of assumed there would be an explanation for it. And even without explanation beyond this, I'm still cool with it. But to return both Sharline and Darius to their world in their time with no real explanation or consequences, and just give them like a bright and happy future, it doesn't sit right with me. Why did Sharline even die then? What was the purpose? The entire appeal of EverGrace's story to me was not a story about cosmically fixing loss or righting wrongs. It was a story about how it feels to survive loss and how it feels to carry the weight of guilt that can't be fixed, how that loss defines you and the direction of your life. And when Sharline returns without explanation, the story becomes about something else. I don't even know. It's no longer about the finality of loss and how that defines Darius. It's instead a story about how loss shapes him, even when the loss ultimately doesn't matter because it's a temporary state. Damage is done, yes, but I personally feel like the entire point of killing Sharline is made meaningless if she just comes back later. Especially because there's no explanation given for her return beyond Moonlight Sword. And I love EverGrace for the way it handles irreversible final grief, but I don't think EverGrace was trying to be that story to begin with. I think I just clocked it wrong. I have stronger feelings about this thematic dissonance that I experienced, but they stem from how much I care about the series, and I don't need to talk about it anymore. If EverGrace wants to end on a note of hope, I'll let it. And please, I'm totally open to the idea that I could be missing something. Let me know if there's something that actually explains this, because I don't get it.
Good you have watched Togane's video for so long you have reached the sanctum of the coned cats. They wish you a nice rest of the video. Part 2, Takase novel.
Let's talk about the Takase novel. This novel takes place before the first game, and it has 6 chapters. It's kind of different than the Shimomura novel because this expands the timeline and tells a story that happens before the game. This is where the story becomes way more compelling and dense. It's probably my favorite piece of media in the entire EverGrace series. The line with Darius in the first game really piqued my interest when he said he was the one who killed Sharline. This novel, to a much greater degree, solidified the world of EverGrace as a very important and meaningful story that I had to tell. I've never talked about a novel before in a video essay, but here we go. The Takase novel introduces a few new characters who are going to be very important moving forward. First, we have Falcon, known as the Hope of Solta. He's the son of the leader of Solta, hates Moria, and he's one of the 4 swordsmen. Ryan, who we'll get an introduction to later, is Darius's adopted brother, another one of the 4 swordsmen. Saris is a hired mercenary with no allegiance, currently working with the Sultan army, again, another one of the 4 swordsmen. And finally, for new characters, we have Lestia. She is the leader of the elite resistance within Moria. She is arguably who this book is about, and she's super cool. I'm very excited to talk about this. Sharline and Darius we already know. Sharline, childhood friend of Darius, kind of an older sister, and Darius is the protagonist, the final of the 4 swordsmen, crest on his right hand. Chapter 1 sets the stage that Solta is currently towards the end of the war with Moria, and Moria is on the verge of defeat. The Biliana Forest, the mother of all things, is at the center of this conflict. The information we're given is as the Biliana Forest expands, which it does on its own per the cycle, it absorbs all the nutrients from the ground and begins killing anything not contained within it. This is how the Biliana Forest maintains the cycle. Then we have the Coalition of Fontrail, which is made up of the 4 villages in Edinburgh: Moria, Solta, Siklu, and Toledo. But only Moria and Solta really matter for this story. The reason Moria and Solta are at war is because Moria believes in the forest and thinks it should be kept intact, while Solta believes it needs to be destroyed to maintain life. With these conflicting beliefs, Moria withdrew from the coalition and they're now a resistance group. But both towns are living in poverty despite this, and they've been at war with each other for a long time. This first chapter essentially shows the Sultan army hanging out, drinking, chatting, general soldier stuff, and it begins to establish the technological advancements of the era within the story as well. Like candlelight instead of electricity, swords instead of guns, tents instead of hospitals, with an ambiguous existence of magic. Moria's forces are smart and cunning, very skilled at battle because of their leader Lestia. In the middle of the night, the Morian army sends a cow with a torch tied to it running towards the Sultan camp, with a whole swarm of wasps following behind. This is kind of a psychological tactic and the first illustration we get of Lestia's leadership. One thing that's really important to note in this first chapter is Darius's insane level of determination to kill everyone in Moria, not just soldiers, and regardless of whether they surrender or not. He's killing everyone, which can't do that, Darius. This is very different from his characterization in EverGrace, where he's kind of just a determined soldier who doesn't really have much to say. Here he comes across as isolated and very vengeful. It's kind of weird. There's an obvious pattern of cycles throughout EverGrace, and I'm sure that Darius's unrelenting desire for revenge, stating that he's going to kill everyone in Moria, says something about this whole cycle motif, but I can't quite pinpoint it exactly. And then we go on to chapter 2. Darius's backstory. The mark on the back of his hand had become more pronounced since the last time he'd checked it. When he was a child, a time when he still knew nothing, a time when he was still innocent to the world, he recalled that the mark was also much more subtle in its appearance. The more people Darius killed, the more vibrant the crest became, as if it soaked up the blood flowing from them. The cursed mark. There were those who called it that. This is the first time in the book we hear about the crest directly. Darius's father also has a crest on his back, and we learn about this when he comes home in From the Rain one night. He tells Darius that he has the same thing on his right hand, but doesn't elaborate further, stating that Darius is simply too young to understand. It seems even the Crestbearers themselves are not really made aware of why they have the crest. The only information they receive is the negative stigma associated with it. Once it becomes active, though, they also know it has uncontrollable power. Otherwise, it kind of just reads like some kind of curse that they're given inexplicably. We also begin to learn more about the poverty of Solta and the history of Edinburgh. Life in Solta was always on the brink. The infertile farmlands, the livestock that could never get enough feed. It was poverty such as this that often sowed the seeds of conflict. The four villages continually fought over land boundaries, water rights, with small conflicts happening with no end in sight. With just the tiniest disagreements over who owned what, the skirmishes eventually developed to the severity that blood was spilt with these battles. And these battles were only increasing in number. Living in Solta was full of constant reminders of how they were living alongside death. The adults in the village begin speaking more and more about the ever-expanding Biliana forest, so Darius asks his mother about these conversations. She tells him about the beliefs Solta holds regarding the forest, then explains to him the legend of the Rubane Empire. She goes on to explain further that the Rubane Empire, in pursuit of greater power, invaded Toledo to kidnap a child. This is all information we learned from the first game. She specifically states how they angered the priestess and received divine judgment, resulting in the Rubanian Empire disappearing entirely. We also learn that Darius was apparently born hundreds of years after the Empire fell, lending further credence to the temporal capabilities present in Edinburgh. When I read this at first, I interpreted the wording of the Rubane Empire disappearing entirely as a roundabout way of saying it was destroyed, but remnants were still present on the land. As we know, it was literally removed from Edinburgh, all traces of it. And this is also why I pointed out the vast ocean and empty sky beneath the land in the first game, because it turns out it's more than just a graphical resource-saving measure. Rubane is just floating somewhere in its own dimension, and I think that's super cool. So this is the first time Darius learns about the Rubane Empire from the perspective of it being a long-lost legend. This is something that has been in his mind for a very long time. Darius's father would hold meetings with other town leaders discussing what to do about the Biliana forest. This is where the idea of clearing the forest started to become the common sentiment held by the villagers of Solta. And this is when Sharline is introduced. On one night in particular, a girl who lived in the neighborhood came by for a visit along with her father. She was a girl by the name of Sharline. Sharline was quite a few years older than Darius and often looked after him, similar to that of an older sister. Her father, just like Darius's father, was concerned about the future of Solta and often participated in the meetings. Darius and Sharline eavesdrop on this meeting, something Darius had been doing on his own up until this point. The two then have a conversation about the people of Moria, whom Darius refers to as stupid. Sharline, in an attempt to help educate Darius, explains a bit more about the Biliana Forest situation, and mentions that if we cut those trees down, something terrible might happen. So she's not really opposed to the plan, but she is a little apprehensive. When it's time for Sharline to leave, her father mentions to Darius's father that there's word of a radical group forming in Moria and that he should be careful. Darius's father believes, however, that even if Moria is against them, he can sway them with words. In the end, the pen is mightier than the sword. One day, Darius is delivering food to an elderly woman, something him and his mother have done many times now, and this elderly woman finally reveals to him the information about the crest that he's been looking for this whole time. A long time ago, it was said that only terrible things revolved around those with the mark. Not only that, but there were many times in which the person themselves would be led to an early death. They would be embroiled in incidents and grave illness alike. She then shuffled him off, stating outright that she's scared of that crest, which is a cool thing to say to a child. Hey, I'm scared of you, and by the way, you're probably gonna die. On the walk home, he's spotted by Sharline, who comforts him after he's given the bad news. That's just a superstition. It's not true at all. Don't you ever believe in that. There's nothing about the mark that's cursed. Darius, there's nothing about you that's cursed. And all at once, the pain in Darius's heart drifted away. Darius was clearly shown a lot of love by the people close to him, his parents and Sharline mostly. She would even begin visiting Darius more often after this, worried about his feelings and the pain that his crest brought him. Sharline was recounting the story of the rise and fall of Rubain to Darius one night at his house, but Darius's father piped in to remind them that it was all made up. He believes the story, but rejects the specifics of Biliana fruit and Palmyra armaments, which I guess he has to because of his stance regarding the forest. A man knocks on the door asking to be let in, leading to this. Darius opened the door. All at once, a strong arm reached out and grabbed him, restraining him. Before he could even scream out, a hand muffled his mouth. It wasn't just one person behind the door. It was 5 men, clothed in black, spilling into their house as if a murky crowd. This is the resistance group from Moria that Darius's father was warned about. Darius is taken hostage, and the resistance group makes their identity and intentions known. They are here from Moria to kill Darius's father. They refuse to talk. They're here to kill and nothing more. Darius could see his father tremble just for a moment, but he wasn't trembling from fear. He was shaking with rage. A young man stepped forward, spear in hand. A short, militaristic shout could be heard, and at the same time, the young man pierced his spear into Darius's father's body. Sharline screamed. The spear pierced through his body a second time. His father's towering body fell to the floor. Another person stepped up. He had a sword in hand, and with it, he slashed into his father's body. It was a slaughter, a completely one-sided slaughter. The man who could do nothing for his son was held hostage, brutalized as if a plaything to them. Darius's mother collapses at this, and the men move towards her, to which Darius attempts to stop them. These men from Moria, who are so unreasonably vicious, throw him against the wall and raise a blade to kill him. Sharline then jumps at this man to try and stop him. When Darius was in pain, when he was miserable, when he was thrown into despair, she would always wrap him up in a hug. How gentle Sharline was, and when that blade inched closer and closer to Darius, she leapt out without so much of an afterthought for her own safety. Just how much bravery could such a gentle frame hold? How strong Sharline was. Darius's right hand became hot, a heat as if flames burst forth from him. Darius raised his hand up. The mark on the back of his hand glowed furiously like never before. Much, much more than before. The crest seemed to glow with the glare, looking back at all the hate in the world cast upon its way, taking control of Darius's body. When Darius comes to after this, he sees the men who had attacked his family splayed out on the ground, weapons still in hand. Their bodies hardly recognizable, cut so savagely that they were nearly hanging on by a thread. "Sharline?" Darius called, jostling her body, but there was no longer any response. No way. There was no way that Sharline was dead too. It wasn't true. It shouldn't be true. Her face looked so peaceful, as if she was just sleeping. At that moment, Darius could feel something change within him once more. He swallowed his breath, eyes fixated on his right hand. The crest began to glow once more. Just like before. No, brighter than before. Hotter than before. Darius understood now. How that mark of his, it had been responding to his emotions all this time. In his violent rage, or perhaps trapped in overwhelming despair, when it became too much to bear, that's when that frightening power would burst out. There was nothing else to think about anymore, only for his body to move on its own, guided once more by that power. That was where Darius's memories ended. Darius had accidentally killed Sharline using a power that was beyond his control. And to be honest, I find this a little weird. To be forewarned about a resistance group by a close friend and have that group show up under suspicious circumstances late at night and not have your guard up as a father protecting his family seems a little bit off to me, but hindsight, it's probably not totally fair to judge Darius's father in this circumstance. It's important to remember that the Biliana Forest is these people's lives. It's not just a beautiful forest or a fun campground. It has major direct implications on everyone's lives in Edinburgh. So a resistance group forming to protect it and to assassinate their enemies sounds a bit far-fetched even to me, but I think it's believable enough, and most importantly, I think it's earned throughout the previous 48 pages of the book. Moria is fighting to maintain the status quo, which I want to find as an indefensible stance, but I really just can't. I know how the cycle works, and if Solta tries to destroy the forest, it's very likely that they'll be purified, so it's really tough as a reader to definitively choose a side. And to be very clear, I am 100% on Darius's side at this point. He's just lost everyone he had to a brutal, stupid, unnecessary attack by Moria. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you, well, actually the cycle means that Moria was technically right. No, dude. Go kill Morians, fuck them, I don't give a shit. The moment in EverGrace where Darius sees Sharline for the first time and says, "She died when I killed her," at the time was very funny because of how poorly it was delivered, and now it holds a lot more weight. Darius leaves Solta after this event, moving to the faraway village of Siklu to live with friends of his father and their son Ryan. The way the novel describes Ryan is almost as a bittersweet stand-in for Sharline, which is something that Darius acknowledges directly himself. With a bright, picturesque smile without a shred of a shadow, it was easy to tell he was a good-natured person. just a little bit did he resemble Sharline. Of course, Ryan was a boy, and Sharline was much older than them both. Nothing about his physical appearance was similar, but in his kind expressions and gentle demeanor, somehow there was a feeling common in them both. And Darius seems to actively reject this comparison in his mind. For him, if he were to think about how similar Ryan is to Sharline, then it would just bring back the memories of Sharline's dying smile. So Darius does the very anime protagonist thing of coldly disallowing anyone else in. But Ryan is patient with Darius despite this, and the two of them grow up together, taking an interest in sword fighting. Eventually, they both become exceptionally skilled swordsmen together, and there's one line that I really liked from this section. Ryan's sword was bright, Darius's was dark. Their master had said something like that once. Though Ryan didn't seem to understand, Darius understood those words perfectly. Darius eventually reveals to Ryan what happened. Up until this point, innocent, caring Ryan simply accepted Darius and never pried about his past. When the topic comes up regarding why they fight, though, Darius finally explains it to Ryan, concluding with this. It doesn't matter whose fault it was. I just can't let anyone else important die anymore. I have to get stronger, strong enough that nobody will ever be able to stop me. Darius shows Ryan his crest, and this section really establishes how, despite the stark contrast between their two motivations, they're still fighting to the same end, to protect those important to them. Ryan illustrates even more loyalty to Darius, and this chapter wraps up with Darius returning to Solta many years after the incident. Solta is even darker than before, even deeper levels of poverty, and an ever-increasing hatred towards the Biliana forest. Fontrail decided to go ahead and begin the process of destroying the forest against the wishes of Moria in an attempt to kind of bring them out of hiding. This is when Darius and Ryan begin fighting in actual battles, and alongside Felk and Saris become known as the Four Swordsmen. Their contributions to the war helped their side greatly, bringing Moria to the point we find them at in the first chapter, on the brink of destruction. If it wasn't for their leader, Lestia. Chapter 3 brings us back to the Sultan army, who is holding a meeting to discuss their next steps in the war against Moria. This chapter mostly serves to give us a little bit of history with Lestia, revealing that she had attempted to hire Saris to kill Darius, but because she was unable to offer him enough money, he declined, and is now working alongside Darius because Solta was able to offer him a sufficient amount of money to fight against Moria. This chapter also highlights some of the characters' personalities a bit. You have Saris, who is detached and cynical, and believe me, we'll see more of that. You have Felk, who is impulsive and childish. You have Ryan, who is rational and calm, to nobody's surprise. He focuses on keeping the peace, and actually finds himself as the mediator of conflicts very often between the group. Darius isolates himself at every opportunity, and remains detached and stoic. Felk immediately begins to accuse Saris of being a spy for Moria, even after Saris explains the concept of a hired mercenary and that he holds no allegiance one way or another, which you think Felk might understand conceptually. Saris doesn't do himself many favors though, acting all secretive and cool until the rest of the group practically pulls the information out of him. But I'm sure I wouldn't want to admit I was almost hired to assassinate someone I was now working with either, so it kind of makes sense. Saris's recounting of Lestia's proposed assassination job leads everyone to begin wondering why Lestia holds such hatred for Darius. Darius is not an enemy of Lestia's beyond simply being a member of the Sultan army as far as anyone is aware. The group goes on to continue to discuss Lestia, mentioning how impressive of a military leader she is, especially as someone so young. And Saris states, "I've caught glimpses of her on the battlefield, but that's it. And to be blunt, she wasn't that great with a sword. She knows her techniques, but her physical strength doesn't match her knowledge. For her to have climbed to such a high rank in such a short time, she has to be extremely skilled. She's undoubtedly passionate for the battlefield." Saris notes that Darius and Lestia are very similar, including their shared connection to the crest, though he doesn't elaborate on this too much. "You and her quite resemble each other somehow. You're obsessed with destroying everything and anything to do with Moria. Unlike Ryan or Falcon, the kind of guys who believe in themselves and what's right, you are clearly different. Nothing to do with upstanding morals or whatever, but fighting for the sake of your own hatred." Then we go into Chapter 4, Lestia's backstory. Chapter 4 begins with Lestia in a library, reading up on the history of the lost empire of Rubain, something she does often. The librarian attempts to begin a conversation with her, which she finds particularly annoying, and she eventually asks to be left alone. Within just a few more pages, we learn that Lestia has a burning passion for the history of Rubain, studying up on it at all waking hours. She's altered her appearance, dyeing her hair black and wearing a skirt, though it's stated that she prefers to wear men's clothing. She's trying to hide her identity and even becomes suspicious of the librarian multiple times. Don't be ridiculous. They wouldn't have set up a perimeter in the Library of Seaclew of all places. We flash back to Lestia's childhood, much in the same way we did with Darius earlier. Lestia's father first introduced her to the stories of Rubain through a picture book filled with illustrations that captured her young mind. Lestia just thought the Rubainian Empire was the most fascinating thing. This naturally led to her learning about the crest, and her father would recount stories of the Empire to her. He talked about Red Wind, the now unnamed Crestbearer mercenary who would fight against Rubain, defeating hundreds of their soldiers on his own. He talked about how the Rubainian Empire conducted their research into Palmyra and the Allcrest until they were punished by our mother, of course. It was like Rubain had attacked the Biliana forest, so in response, the entire empire was destroyed, but in a single moment. This fascination with Palmyra, Rubain, and the crest is something that Lestia would latch onto at a very young age. Her perspective, however, is interesting, and leads into Lestia being kind of a complex character. Lestia let out a sigh of relief. The bad guys always lose, for the Biliana forest was still as green and lush as ever. Dad, but what about Palmyra? If we use the Biliana fruit, can we still make Palmyra now? Her questioning is shut down very quickly, as her father tells her that all the research from the Rubainian Empire was destroyed alongside it. Nobody knows how to do that stuff anymore. But those crest bearers, they could still use Palmyra with no problem even now, right? So that means even I could. Her father cuts her off and tells her to stop thinking about it, exhibiting a rare sense of fear on his face. I think Lestia's father wanted to instill that same fear of the mother of all things in Lestia, but this backfired and instead created a Crestbearer who has an unrelenting passion for learning everything about it. Even with her father's reprimanding, she retains this fascination. Lestia's father goes on to talk more about how important the Biliana forest is, how it gives life to everything, gives everyone the strength to live, which is a cool, nice, fictional thought, but this started me leading down a specific idea I had. Does the mother of all things distinguish between survival and greed with regards to what it chooses to purify? For example, the Rubainians attacked and angered a priestess in their greedy pursuit for more power. They weren't trying to save their people from extreme poverty, they were trying to acquire even more power than they already had. So the end goal for Solta's motivations and Rubain's motivations are different circumstances. Even if we operate under the assumption that the history books are totally correct, and that destroying the Biliana forest is a bad thing inherently. We still have no evidence of this, even within the history that's being told. We have evidence that attacking a Crestbearer and kidnapping her child for sinister research purposes is bad, and that, by extension, could mean that destroying the forest is similarly bad. But again, we don't really have any evidence of that. This is still left a little bit ambiguous, and I don't really know what to make of it. What I can say, though, is that it makes sense that Moria, the village who is now losing the war they incited, is the only village harboring this belief. From any perspective I can think of, it doesn't make sense to fight to maintain the status quo that, in this case, is slowly killing everyone off without offering any sort of alternative relief. We don't really know if felling the Biliana forest will solve everyone's problems or just lead to more destruction, but the alternative is suffering and death. It's a fairly classic logic puzzle akin to the trolley problem, and ultimately I find myself on the side of agency at the cost of sacrifice. In this case, potential sacrifice, because we don't know that that's going to happen. It's like if the one guy on the other track was only potentially there, and you don't know for sure. It seems Moria is a village filled with people who simply wouldn't pull the lever. This conflict is really about whether action itself is permissible under uncertainty, which is a lot more interesting than just,
I like the forest,
versus,
I hate the forest.
Lestia asks whether the Biliana forest is actually good or not, which is a very high-level question that even I haven't really figured out. And when her father asks her where these ideas were implanted in her mind, she tells him of a boy in the village named Gastal. Gastal is an interesting character. He contrasts the tribalism of the Morians. He speaks against their beliefs, and one day gets into a fight where he's seriously injured. Because of his reputation, nobody comes to his rescue and nobody attempts to help him recover. Lestia's father similarly hates Gastal, and this leads Lestia into a dilemma. My father must be on the right side of things, which means Gastal must be wrong after all, because that's what cynical people do. They reject anything that's right and make up their own line of logic to fit their selfish needs. Gastal eventually leaves the village after being attacked, much to Lestia's relief. Her cognitive dissonance is now resolved with his departure. Jumping forward a bit, Lestia's father leaves one night and never returns, when one day other Moria villagers come to inform them that her father had died in Solta. The men didn't elaborate further, framing this as an attack against her father, but Lestia, however, very quickly learned the truth. She would soon come to realize that her father hadn't died an honorable death, and soon she would be thrown into a bottomless spiral of despair. It became kind of a taboo to speak of Lestia's father and the other men who were killed alongside him. This is when Lestia begins to search for answers, and eventually remembers the only person in her village who would ever offer an opposing viewpoint, Gastal. He was still living in Moria in an old abandoned house alone. She visited him and found the answers she was seeking. Basically, in everyone's eyes, your father's become a symbol of disgust that's tarnished the whole village, because he's the one that stooped to such a low level that he'd kill a bunch of sultans head-on, low enough to even target children. So, Lestia's father was among the group of men who killed Darius's father, in a violent rage that apparently even the Morians couldn't endorse, scorning him and his actions after his death. So the Morians are tribalistic, as we've observed, but for some reason, this crosses the line for them. So their ideals sit somewhere between wanting this war and actively hating it, which feels contradictory to me. Gastal does have another thought that I really like, though. If not him, someone was bound to do this one way or another. If your father actually succeeded and came back to the village, I bet you he would be hailed as a hero by now. But because he failed, everybody treats him as this terrible, unspeakable villain. It's funny, isn't it? Everyone thinks they have the right to judge your father now, even though no one has the balls to do what he actually did. Lestia was surprised. To see the cynical Gaston actually stand up for her father with words like that was something she didn't expect from him. Gaston told Lestia about the lone boy who survived the attack and his mysterious marking. When processing the information Gaston shared with her, her mind eventually settled on Darius. That monster who bore the crest, that monster who tore apart her father in the blink of an eye. That who shared the same pain as her, the same marking as the one on her chest. All the more reason for her hate to whip up in flames. From this point on, Lestia worked. Her goal? To take care of her mother and save up enough money to hire Saris to assassinate Darius, only to find, after years of working, that she hadn't earned nearly enough. Eventually, Lestia's mother dies. When Lestia was just 2 years old, her brother had also died from illness that they couldn't afford to treat, and her father, as we know, was killed after attacking Darius's family. Lestia, much like Darius, was now completely alone. No longer did she need a human heart. No longer did she want one. Love, kindness, she simply paired it off and threw it away, as if scraps of food. There's one section discussing Lestia's time working at a bar, explaining that she refused to prostitute herself despite it being a common occurrence in the new village she traveled to in search of work after her mother's death. The reason the girl did not sell her body was but a single one, for the crest on the right side of her chest would have been bared for anyone to see. Lestia was, as much as anyone, extremely cognizant of the stigma surrounding her crest. I find it interesting that the book specifically mentions this as being the only reason she refuses to prostitute herself. After failing to afford Saris's assassination services, she decides to join the army. She would be the one to kill Darius with her own 2 hands. Her research into the Rubain Empire sparked back up at this point, specifically regarding the human research that the Empire was conducting. If she could get her hands on the knowledge of Palmyra, maybe she could wield the power to defeat Darius. The story goes very far out of its way to illustrate to us that Lestia is small in stature, and no matter how much she trained and improved her strength, she would always fall short compared to the men. Lestia, however, didn't care. She knew her weaknesses and worked around them. Even when it started to become clear that Moria was going to lose the war, she refused to surrender. To her, the most important thing was not the victory of Moria, nor the protection of the forest. It was revenge. The person who had killed her father, the one who had sent her mother spiraling into ruin, and of course, the boy who bore the same crest as she did. The hate she harbored for Darius was scorching, and it was that scorching fire alone lit under her feet that kept Lestia going. Chapter 5, The Library, begins with the Sultan army beginning the logging of the forest in order to draw the Moria army out of hiding. The village of Siklu sends the Sulta army reports of a young woman who is constantly at the library reading about the Rubain Empire. The army very quickly puts together that she's interested in the topic because of Palmyra armaments, despite Felk's insistence that it's all just a fairy tale. According to the Rubain laboratories, the only people who could wield Palmyra armaments are those with the crest. So if Lestia's thinking of trying to revive those kinds of things back, then... Dince Felk is having a hard time putting this information together, despite both Darius and Saris being on the same page, so Saris states it outright. If Lestia's thinking about using the research of human secrets for her own purposes, there's a non-zero chance that she's thinking of wielding Palmyra armaments, ain't there? Which is to say, just like Darius, she's got the crest somewhere on her body. We return to Lestia's story at this point. Still at the library, researching away, eventually it's closing time, and the librarian tells her she can take home some books if she wishes. I like the librarian in this story. You can tell it's somebody who just really loves books and really loves to connect with the people who read them. After becoming suspicious that she's being watched after leaving the library with her books, this scene very quickly turns into Lestia trapped within the library, surrounded by the Sultan army who have finally located her. Lestia takes the librarian hostage, striking him with power that is, according to the book, strong enough to break off a tooth. This is another moment that really illustrates what kind of person Lestia is. It really stood out to me. Anyway, Lestia is trying to figure out an escape route, which is when we get this moment between Lestia and Saris that I found very in service of the story, let's say. Lestia runs up to the second floor hoping to escape through a window, only to be met by Saris, the only member of the Sultan army who is able to reach the second floor in the darkness of the now unlit library. The two of them have a multiple-page-long interaction before Saris decides to let her escape. The reason he gives for this is that he didn't go to the second floor in pursuit of her, rather he did so because he was playing hooky. I just wrote down the word anime on the page for my notes. It's very possible that Saris let her escape either because of their history or because he wanted to let Darius fight her on more even terms. Who knows, man. His motivation for doing this could possibly stem from his time with Darius up until now, assuming this is even what the author intended. It's also very possible that it's simply as he says, he didn't feel like working. I don't get it. Either way, Lestia escapes by jumping out of a second-story window and hiding in the darkness, lightly injuring herself in the process. Back in the library, Felk begins to freak out, angry that they can't find Lestia. So he burns down the entire library and just sits there and watches the fire burn. I guess his thought process was that it was worth destroying an entire library containing very important historical research across thousands of books if they could find and kill Lestia in the process. But we know she had already escaped. And yet again, I'm finding myself formulating my own motivations for characters' actions in this chapter because I don't get it. Poor librarian, by the way, this has not been a good night for him. Lestia finds herself in the crowd that began forming to observe the library fire, and because she's in a disguise, nobody recognizes her, so she's able to slip away into the night, bringing Chapter 5 to a close. The final chapter of the Takase novel begins with Ryan asking Darius to take a walk with him through Moria. The Biliana forest logging project had been going well, though they still hadn't located Lestia. Lengths of time are rarely explicitly described in this novel. I haven't pointed this out up until now, but it's an interesting decision. Time just seems to pass, and it's up to us to interpret that passage of time any way we choose, which I think as a storytelling tool is pretty powerful. Darius is specified to be 4 or 5 years old at the time of the incident. In the Shimomura novel, it specifies that Darius last saw Sharline 13 years ago, so Darius is like 18, which makes sense given his appearance as long as we use JoJo logic. In fact, most of the characters we've already met in this novel and are about to meet in Forever Kingdom aren't even technically adults yet. So it's really cool that they're fighting a war. Ryan's motivation for bringing Darius to the now abandoned and completely decrepit Moria is to talk to him about rebuilding, much like the rebuilding that Darius and Sharline undertake in the Shimomura novel ending. The war appears to be nearing its end, with nobody having seen much of the Morian army and no resistance to the logging plans that the coalition is now underway with. And this is when Lestia and her elite soldiers show up to attack the two. There's a long fight sequence where Darius and Ryan show the Morian army their battle prowess. Darius takes a hit and is severely injured, but eventually Darius and Lestia meet face to face. Positioned right in front of Darius was none other than Lestia. Even she had a sword in hand, now after all this time. She settled into a defensive stance, straight out of a textbook. Darius could feel a shudder throughout his entire body, not out of fear, but the delight he partook in finally standing against Lestia. Darius asks what her motivations are and why she's so driven to kill him, and she reveals all. The backstory of her father attacking Darius's family. The interaction between the two is loaded with vitriol from both sides in a way that I thought was pretty well written. He sure knew how to pick his targets. Your father was a damn coward, using me as a hostage, knowing I was powerless in order to slaughter my parents in cold blood. Of course he deserved to die. I will absolutely never forget what happened. The day my father, my mother, and Sharline, who treated me like her own family, all of them, slain by assassins, slain by your father. Hate me all you want, because I despise you just as much. You and every single Morian, every one of them. I've never wanted to stop fighting, not until I eradicate every single last one of you. You're a goddamn monster. Call me a monster all you want, but you're just like me. We're monsters with brands carved into our accursed bodies. Lestia mentions that the two of them are different, but she can't articulate any reasons to justify this claim. She's actually very short on words in this interaction in general, compared to Darius, who has what is effectively an entire monologue. Lestia, on the other hand, wants to separate her identity from Darius because she has to believe he's a monster, otherwise her actions up until now can't be rationalized. Her entire resistance against the Coalition can't be justified. But most importantly, her father's death feels meaningless if she accepts that he was the bad guy and that Darius was acting in self-defense. Which she understands logically, but just refuses to accept. I do like how Lestia's character is written in this way. With a shout, Lestia prepared to swing her sword down. The sword was raised aloft in the air, the last remnants of sunlight reflecting against it. She could see the end. All it took was one strike to the skull, and then it would be over. She would kill Darius. But Darius was not someone simple enough to be killed by a strike so easily. Just before it landed, he pulled his body back, dodging Lestia's sword, and in his defenseless position, made one last lunge. The horrible sound of steel cutting through flesh could be heard, and for a moment, everything came to a standstill. The Moria soldiers were dumbfounded, staring at the young girl, their commander, who had brought them all the way to this final battle. Darius's sword pierced right through the left side of her chest. Lestia's hands went slack, her body frozen, her eyes still transfixed on Darius with a fiery glare. And then, Lestia's small body crumpled. The Moria soldiers immediately give up at the sight of their strongest commander being killed in front of their eyes. At first, they try to get her medical attention, but moments later, they realize all they can do is carry her away from the battlefield. Lestia lets out a few more words and has one final defiant action. I'm not a monster. Lestia carefully guided the sword, slicing open her own clothes. From her collar down to her men's clothing, everything from her neck down, and then her skin was bare. On Lestia's left breast was a strange marking. It was a mark, or rather, it would be more fitting to call it a brand, like the dragged remnants of a ghastly burn. It spread all over her chest, just reaching her shoulder. I couldn't forgive him, the boy who killed my father. That goddamn monster who had the same mark as me. That's why I'm not a monster. Those were her last words. We immediately jump to Lestia's funeral in a scene that reminds me of something straight out of the original Naruto series. Lestia is buried next to her father, and the only ones in attendance are soldiers from both sides of the war. Darius is not present, recovering from an injury on his shoulder. There's a conversation here between Ryan and Saris, who both attend the funeral, where they discuss Lestia's crest. This conversation leaves it ambiguous as to whether Lestia's crest was real, and if it was, whether she burned it off at some point. Saris departs the group, with Lestia's death finally marking the end of the Morian War, even after innocent Ryan tries to get him to stay. Later, Ryan enters the tent Darius is recovering in to find Darius holding a dagger. I've been thinking. Ever since I saw Lestia die with my own 2 eyes, I've been thinking. I've been thinking about how she and I weren't the same after all. If she could burn off her own crest like that, then I should do it too. I've loathed this crest for so long. How much I've yearned to just escape from it. But I couldn't. I could only ignore its existence wrapped under layers of cloth. I should have done this a long time ago, so that I could escape this fate. Darius slowly raised the dagger. This mark that killed Sharline, I should have cut it off earlier. Much earlier. Ryan jumps at Darius and stops him from severing his own hand, stabbing the dagger into Darius's left shoulder. By the way, this is his already injured shoulder. You and Lestia are different. Some more time passes and Darius finally recovers enough to leave the tent. The logging plans for the Biliana forest were now behind schedule as the few remaining Morian resistance members were still causing trouble. They just won't give up. Darius goes for a walk, his mindset at this point not fully explained to us. He walks through the Biliana forest for days until he runs out of stamina. He remembers the Rubane Empire. He narrowly avoids the few remaining Moria soldiers. Sometimes he falls asleep and wakes back up only to begin walking again. This entire sequence is surreal. And then it appeared. Above his head, the tightly woven layers of leaves suddenly unraveled to a clearing. Sunlight suddenly came through the trees. The way it sloped down, he surmised it was a little past afternoon, going into the early evening hours of the day. Darius rubbed his eyes. In front of him was a single huge tree rising up from the ground. It looked different from the trees surrounding the area. From time immemorial, that tree must have been there as the king, ruling over everything, sapping up life from everything and anything, laughing down, watching people like they were ants, ensuring they followed the destinies decided for them. And then he realized, the enemy was not Lestia. It wasn't Moria. It wasn't even the assassins who had killed his family. The thing that had played with Darius's fate, his life, the real source of what he should have been directing his hate towards. It wasn't a battlefield. It was here. This forest clearing that looked so peaceful at first. This forest that could be seen from anywhere in Salta. Darius swings his sword at the Biliana tree, carving into it just slightly, and then becomes enveloped in a dazzling white light. The feeling that ensued felt similar to the way he felt on the day when his crest first awoke, but this was much stronger, and the book ends with this. Sharline. As Darius closed his eyes, that name escaped his mouth, soundless as it was. Why he called for that name, not even he knew. For so long he had sealed those memories away, but now the gentle visage of her face appeared brilliantly within him. Sharline smiled with a smile that beckoned to him, and then suddenly Darius toppled to the ground, as if struck. His consciousness went somewhere very, very far away. At his last moments, he felt as if he was within a hazy dream. So this is the destiny for those who bear the crest. He had no more regrets, for this was it. This was how he would decide to settle things, in a way only he and he himself could do. Sharline was spinning, leaping as if she was as light as a feather, all the while dancing with a bright smile on her face. To the girl within his dreams, Darius faintly smiled back in return, and in the next moment, everything went dark. This Takase novel is good. It's well written and tells a fascinating story with only maybe a few moments that I have trouble believing. I think Lestia is a really interesting character. She reflects back a version of Darius that might exist if it wasn't for the presence of Ryan, who is, in my mind, an underrated piece of the story so far. Darius could have become the monster Lestia wanted him to be to justify her existence in her mind. Even though Darius refused to deeply connect with Ryan, there's still a massive role he played in keeping Darius grounded, I think. The conflict that Edinburgh demonstrates is an almost universally understood state conceptually. The ambiguity of the Biliana Forest's power and the desire to destroy its perceived sapping of natural resources in pursuit of continued human survival has parallels throughout history. I think this novel does a good job illustrating both sides. The ending where Darius attacks the Biliana tree leaves me wondering if maybe these trees do actually hold some kind of power that prevents them from being destroyed. Lestia being a Crestbearer and the only one in her family is something I also found interesting. We already know that the mother of all things simply chooses who is to be born a Crestbearer, and it seems as though it's not something that can be inherited genetically, but seeing evidence of this was nice for confirming my intuition about this, though we don't really know if Lestia's crest was real. I like that these special characters live and die just like anyone else, and only find specific purpose in rare instances. I also personally like to go with Takase's version of events leading into EverGrace, Darius on some kind of soul-searching journey, coming across a Biliana tree, and then possibly being transported back to the Rubain Empire. For a while, I wanted to believe that this is where Darius died, and all of EverGrace was some kind of dream sequence where he explored the fallen Rubain Empire and saw Sharline again, which I think is way fucking cooler than the Shimomura novel's ending. And, I mean, we've already discussed the thematic issues I have with that ending, so I won't make any definitive statements. I'm just sharing my thoughts about it. We've learned about a few characters through this novel. Felk, Saris, Ryan. The retelling that I presented didn't really discuss them too in-depth, but that's okay, because Forever Kingdom features all three of them.
Part 3, Forever Kingdom and Sugawara Manga.
Taking place even before the Takase novel, we're stepping further back in the timeline to take a look at Forever Kingdom. Forever Kingdom was released in 2002 and was received better than EverGrace was. As a game, I definitely think it's an improvement, but like many sequels, it changed things up quite a bit, and not in ways I particularly loved. So, Forever Kingdom was not my favorite, but I still played it and enjoyed it, so I wanted to share the story in this video, mostly for the sake of completeness. I'm here, I played it, let's talk about it. Forever Kingdom starts with a monologue delivered by Darius. He explains the state of the world, which we already know about from the Takase novel. Moria and Solta at war, Siklu and Toledo part of the coalition of Fawn Trail, and things have been like this for more than a decade. The war is currently at a ceasefire, though, as the continent recovers from the eve of disaster, a mysterious cataclysmic event that took place about a year prior, where monsters were unleashed seemingly out of nowhere. This took its toll on both Moria and Solta, and the armies are still recovering. The intro then goes on to imply that Solta is somehow the bad guys, with the line, Not learning from history, however, those in command of the Sulta army began the gradual process of rebuilding the army. Don't know what that's supposed to imply. We know very well why they would want to do that. The game never seems to go into the destruction and toll of human life that the Biliana Forest takes. It actually kind of doesn't cover any of the stuff we've been discussing up until now. And this is mostly because of Fayana. The first cutscene introduces both her as well as these early 3D graphics. My god. At least we're not cutting our eyes on the aliasing in this game. Fayana is traveling with Darius and Ryan, two characters we're already very familiar with. Her first action is to fall to the ground and then get back up, followed by her running towards the sounds of someone calling for help.
Anna, what's wrong?
Did you hear that? Somebody's calling for help!
You hear that? That's what it sounds like. The trio sees a purple-haired girl, a creepy evil guy, and a swordman.
Darius, be careful, he's a swordsman.
Thank you, Ryan.
What's going on? I don't have any strength.
This is probably...
Rai, you know about this?
I've heard of it. It's a forbidden curse. The Soul Bind.
Curse? What's that supposed to mean?
It means that we're all sharing our lives together now. When one of us is hurt, we all will share and feel the pain. If one of us dies, then the others will also die.
Oh, that's fun.
The voice acting in this game isn't terrible. It's actually a pretty decent improvement over the first game. But this now gives Darius a total of 4 different characterizations between all pieces of EverGrace media. Driven, determined soldier in EverGrace. Dark and aggressive in the Shimomura novel, which I didn't really cover that much. Isolated and quiet in the Takase novel. And smug, sarcastic guy in Forever Kingdom, which might be my favorite. He's actually really likable in this game. This wizard, or whatever, put a curse on our trio that binds their souls together. They share damage, and if any one of them dies, they all die. This is their motivation for finding him to undo the curse, as well as a gameplay explanation for the Sonic Heroes trio team system. And they're not exaggerating. Everyone shares HP in this game. Faye mentions having weird, nostalgic feelings regarding the purple-haired girl who was being attacked, so she probably knows her or something. Faye's characterization in this game is interesting. She's presented as very timid, with the logical explanation for this being her amnesia. She doesn't really know what's going on, following Darius and Ryan simply because they were there to help her, and the game makes that abundantly clear. She doesn't really have the agency of a Sharline, but I still like her. By the way, we're doing this again. She is not strong enough to carry or use heavy weapons such as swords or axes. Why are we doing this for every single female character, EverGrace? Sharline, Lestia, and now Fayana.
What are we doing?
Even if it is true that these women are weaker than the males in the series, why are we bringing it up constantly? The gameplay itself feels very similar to the first game, but obviously it's also wildly different in certain ways because of the whole team-based combat thing. Palmyra armaments are back in the form of Palmyra actions, where Palmyra armaments refer to the actual equipment, Palmyra actions refer to, well, the actions. Palmyra armaments existing in this game doesn't make sense, and there's never an explanation offered for this inconsistency from what I know. Palmyra research is supposed to have all been lost with the Rubane Empire's purification. In all other contexts, Palmyra armaments are referred to as a mystical ancient technology that only Crestbearers could use. I don't know why Sharline could use them in the first game, but that transcends time and space, so I'm willing to accept it. But with the ambiguity of this game's place in the timeline and the fact that it's mostly a story about Faye, I simply decided to stop trying to make sense of this. They can do whatever they want with Palmyra armaments. I don't care.
Look, Darius. It's a child's drawing.
Yeah, I guess this would be a cool place for kids to play.
Okay, that's actually kind of a funny joke. I really like sarcastic Darius. Also, what the fuck are you talking about, Faye? This is like the final artwork for the Ocarina of Time world map. It looks a little better than a kid's drawing.
The child that drew this had some good artistic talent, though.
I can't remember the last time I heard you laugh.
Really?
Yeah.
I like the dynamic the three of them have. I wish they would have done more of this. They tried a few times throughout the game, but it never really lands like it does this first time. Darius is still after the Morians for what they did to his family, but because of the Eve of Destruction and this new Soulbind curse, he's putting that off for now. They're trying to fix the curse, and both him and Ryan are trying to reach the Sultan army to join them. And Forever Kingdom is basically a side story for the EverGrace universe. This is all we get for Darius's story. I really wish there would have been more after this game to flesh it out further, because Forever Kingdom is not a very important piece of the story. It retcons multiple mechanics that have been previously established, such as Palmyra, the Sulta army's motivations, and it even outright ignores the existence of Crestbearers. The exclusion of Crestbearers could be due to the fact that Darius is still hiding his crest at this point in the timeline, and he's also the only one who has a crest. Either way, it's just never acknowledged.
We're surrounded.
Ew, they're ugly. What are they?
The group defeats the ugly ogres at the Shrine of Mist, and this is when they meet Felk. So, this pretty definitively places this game before anything else in the timeline. At camp that night, Felk explains what the Eve of Destruction was and what happened. Whoever led the monsters was a human, apparently, a young girl. Faye gets very upset at this reveal, lashing out at Felk, but he's too hot-headed to just take that lying down. Felk continues discussing some more history. The Shrine of Mist, which is where our group was just at, was built to worship the twin goddesses. Hundreds of years ago, there were two princesses. They apparently destroyed the empire for their own selfish desires, so the people built a shrine out of fear, hoping that if they praised the two enough, they wouldn't cause any more destruction. Faye starts to talk about the purple-haired girl during this conversation, but Ryan tells Faye she probably needs to rest. Okay. In the middle of the night, Faye runs away, and nobody has any idea where she could have gone. They eventually figure that she might have gone to the Shrine of Mist, considering that was the topic of discussion last night, and she seemed to get pretty worked up about it. Despite Felk saying she would never survive there, the three of them go to search for her and find the magician. Following the magician into the shrine, the group eventually reconnects with Faye, who inexplicably seems drawn to the legend of the twin goddesses. The group is then separated as the magician escapes, and the difficulty of the game immediately skyrockets. I haven't talked about the gameplay much, and I don't really plan to, but after 4 attempts, I finally defeated the monsters, and the walls are lifted. But the magician is long gone. This is where the group learns that Felk is the son of the leader of Sulta. Faye mentions that the magician was traveling with a swordsman who couldn't use his left arm, and Felk knows who this is, Drumhort, his older brother. Drumhort left Sulta years ago, but Felk won't say anything more about him and just leaves. Saris shows up for the first time and asks what's up with Felk's sudden shift in demeanor. They keep mentioning this dandelion field as though this is some important major area in the game.
Bro, you want to go to the dandelion field? Oh, what the fuck? Yes, I love Taraxacum!
It's a cool spot. It's featured on the main menu, but it doesn't really hold the impact they seem to be setting it up for. Either way, this is the group's next destination. And this begins my favorite section of the game. The music here is one of my new favorite tracks in the whole series. I listen to it a lot. I don't really know how to describe to you what part of it I enjoyed the most, so I'm just gonna play it for you on my little Gretsch guitar. I suck at playing guitar. It's over. Guitar concert, it's over. Passing through the Canyon of Defile into the Land of the Dead, cool area names, our group sees the purple girl standing by a tombstone. She then promptly disappears. To our beloved princess, rest here in the land of the beautiful, where memories live and fairies dance. We pray for your eternal peace and offer you the royal toy that you cherished. Cool juxtaposition, a little bit sad. The group finally reaches their beloved Dandelion Field, and Fiona seems to vaguely remember this area. Yeah, it was on the main menu, Faye. Felk and Saris are already here, so everyone teams up to chase after Drumhort, but not before we go back to another camping scene. At the designated lore dump spot, Felk tells the group that Drumhort is his older brother. Drumhort is known as the Hope of Solta, the same title we know that Felk has in the Takase novel. Essentially, Drumhort is a traitor. He left the Sultan army and joined the Magician, whose name we finally learn is Darsol. They try to give Felk the same personality he has in the Takase novel, but he actually feels more convincing as a person in Forever Kingdom. He has his usual reaction about Saris's comment regarding Drumhort being a traitor by his own will, which is anger. But it quickly becomes clear how Felk knows Saris is right, and this is a side of him that was not conveyed in the novel. He would always come off hot-headed and impulsive until someone either physically restrained him or he successfully burned down a library. There were almost never any times where he just cooled down. Saris decides to accompany the group because it turns out nobody was at the Dandelion Field. Wow, who cares about this place? They're headed to a lake instead. There's a very tropey bad guy conversation between Darsol and Drumhort here.
Are you gonna be able to fight your brother? I don't freaking care. My emotions are gone and my heart is dark. I only follow when I believe.
Okay, dude. At the Lake of Dreams, Felk is trying to jump off the boat, and Saris is doing this to him. I don't know what's happening. At this broken bridge, Ryan claims to see something in the water. I don't see anything, personally. Ryan, you don't need to show off. We already like you. Faye rings the bell she finds, and I can't comprehend what's happening in this cutscene. I think they're talking about a palace underwater, which is what Ryan saw. And entering this palace apparently requires pushing Faye overboard without communicating why to anybody. This is classic cool guy mercenary archetype behavior. I'm gonna do something that looks fucked up on the surface, but is actually beneficial to everyone and never explain myself. All right, Saris. Everyone is warped to the palace for some reason after Saris attempts to drown Faye. This is apparently the Shadow World, which is easy enough to parse logically, but we're never actually given the mechanics behind this. Saris seems to know something about both this area and about Faye that nobody else is privy to, which explains his inclination to throw her overboard. They hear the twin goddesses talking and see a visage of the two appear in front of them. Short-sighted Felk becomes suspicious of Faye having teamed up with Darsol at this point because nobody has any idea where they are or what they're doing, because Saris just has to remain mysterious and refuses to explain anything. I just find this section extremely hard to believe and a little unsettling from start to finish. I just don't like it, is the thing. I just don't like it. The first floor courtyard is really cool with this big tree in the middle. This might be a Billiana tree, but I mean, we never get any explanation on anything in this place. I hate it here. Does anybody know if we have to keep going? King's Throne has a couple cool puzzles. They expanded on the equipment puzzle by requiring all 3 party members to equip specific pieces. I find it very funny how this mirror just comedically cracks if you don't get the combination right. The boss of the palace is this two-headed multi-element bull, which would normally be a cool challenge since it resists both fire and ice, which are opposing, but the only reason that took more than 5 seconds to clear was because of the scripted events where he had to jump up into the ceiling like a cat. The door opens and the group runs into Darsol. Darsol reveals that the purple twin princess we've seen a number of times now synchronizes with Faye, so they're definitely connected in some way. I think we could have probably intuited that by now. Felk confronts Drumhort, but he has nothing to say, and the bad guys get away. The palace begins crumbling, obviously, and they're back at camp. Saris explains that he was previously hired by Darsol, so this is now the second time he's been hired by the main character's enemy, which is not great for his ever-decreasing reputation in my eyes. Also, we can't keep using this trick as some kind of big reveal. He's a mercenary. We understand that he's hired by the opposition at times. Saris discusses the Forgotten Valley, much cooler than the Dandelion Field, by the way. The Forgotten Valley holds the very essence of Palmyra, whatever that means, since we know that Palmyra is refined Biliana fruit and not some nebulous energy that has no origin or explanation. Forgotten Valley itself, though, has some kind of innate power that causes people to forget and avoid it, which I found pretty cool conceptually. Saris was a bodyguard for Darsol and Drumhort during an exploration of the valley, but they didn't find any treasure, only a Palmyra doll. The Palmyra doll is said to hold great power when a human soul is placed within it. The story positions the Palmyra doll as the strongest and most horrifying weapon developed by the ancient empire Rubain. I think this counts as a retcon to what the Rubain Empire created, adding their strongest and most horrifying weapon to the list of war crimes that led to their purification. I'm fine with expanding the world of Rubain, but do we have to label this new thing as the most definitively powerful and horrible weapon? This won't matter ultimately since there was no more world expansion after this. It's just that it becomes hard to talk about a major plot device when you've already definitively stated something as the most powerful of all time, unless you fall into shonen anime tropes. To be fair though, Forever Kingdom is ridiculously anime. Darsol apparently awoke the sleeping Palmyra doll and unleashed its powers, but oh no! It was too powerful, and Darsol couldn't control it. The doll brought with its awakening an army of mutants, and this was the cause of the eve of disaster. The doll also attacked Drumhort and took part of his soul. This is when he lost use of his left arm, much like Orochimaru. My god, dude. Saris tells the group that Faye's soul is in harmony with the Palmyra doll. They radiate the same energy. Saris then digs himself a deeper hole by saying that he wasn't sure about this connection, so he pushed her off the boat to test whether she had the powers he thought she did, which is cool. It's just such cool behavior. The palace that Ryan saw in the lake is the same palace that the twin goddesses Solka and Carmilla lived in when they were alive. Faye remembers none of this, but Saris mentions that Solka could crash out at any moment, triggering another cataclysmic event, so they have to kill her, the purple girl. It's not really explained at this exact moment, but later we do learn that the Palmyra doll is directly connected to the twin goddesses. Like many things in EverGrace, it's a bit difficult to process cleanly. Faye points the group in the direction to find Solka, and we enter the most expansive area in the game. It took me quite a while to get through. At the end of this massive ice and fire zone, the group runs into Solka, who seems to have been waiting for them. Once they defeat her, Faye tries to comfort her.
Solka.
Darius, are you sure that this was our only option?
Yes.
Isn't there another way? I feel bad for the princess.
Another way? If there is one, tell me.
Fiona, are you okay?
Dandelions.
Huh?
I can see the dandelion field.
Yes! I fucking love dandelions!
Faye reveals some of Solka's memories back at camp, and we get some information about her. Solka was lonely. She struggled to communicate. She was always arguing with her sister. She wanted to be closer to her sister, so she did mischievous things to get attention, including stealing Carmila's treasure and accidentally breaking it. Solka didn't know what to do, and that's when a magician, speculated to be Darsol's ancestor, showed up. The magician made a deal with Solka to give her soul to the Palmyra doll in exchange for fixing her sister's treasure, which seems like a bit of an unfair trade. Faye says that she thinks Carmila is probably nearby, and then one of the boys tells Faye to go to sleep. So that's the second time now that they've commanded her to go to sleep, which is so weird. I get that this game came out in 2002, but what the fuck? Carmila asks Darsol what happened to Solka, and he tells her she died.
She is no longer with us.
What?
Don't misunderstand me. You and your sister were nothing but tools for me.
Hey, why don't you tell me more about how evil you are? Faye continues to feel Carmila's presence, and they proceed through this cavern. They find the 2 orbs for the 2 statues, and we enter another one of the coolest areas in the whole game, the Illusionary City. It's here where the gang meets up with Saris and Felk, who got his hand stuck in the Orb of Stiff Limbs. Apparently, if his hand stays stuck in the orb, his soul will be drained, but I don't know. At this point, I don't trust Saris. I don't want to listen to what he says, even if he is right. They have an idea as to how to free him, but it requires all of their participation. The 4 loose-limbed people split into 2 groups who head to the rescue orbs up top. Faye and Ryan walk through their side of the City of Hope and find a bunch of dolls littered throughout the city. Some are alive and some are inanimate. The City of Hope leads into a room with 1 million dolls who all must be defeated to progress. I liked this style of boss fight actually, because it felt like a challenge that wasn't completely insurmountable, like most bosses in the game.
Looks like we made it first.
Hurry up! Shut up! How about some patience?
Saris and Darius walk through the City of Lost Hope, which is very similar to the City of Hope. It's just lost. Their boss encounter is this floating lady with detached arms. It's a pretty cool design. The encounter, however, kind of sucks. I had to lock her in the corner to kill her. They break the 4 orbs and Felk is freed, which is an extremely convenient situation if you think about it, and they find Carmila.
Carmila?
Fiona, it's useless.
But...
Look at her. She doesn't understand anything you're saying.
It's useless. She's my doll. Better yet, my toy.
Carmila... Why?
This is another easy boss fight, but I don't think anybody gave Carmila direction with her voice lines. She sounds very confused, which could be intentional actually, and if it is, that's pretty good direction.
Solka, I couldn't save you. I'm sorry, Solka. My younger sister.
Carmila.
So, did we do the right thing? They're probably happier being laid to eternal rest rather than being used by Darsol, right?
Ryan, who am I? Why did Carmila call me Solka?
Apparently Darius sent Saris and Felk away because he didn't want them to be around when Faye was in this emotional state. And then Darius tells them they need to sleep.
This is the Forgotten Valley. This is where Darsal found the Palmyra doll.
Darsal and Drumhort are here. We'll end it once and for all. The Soulbind and Solka and Carmilla.
Forgotten Valley has what is widely considered the best track in the game, and this area in general has a really cool design. At the end, there are 4 angel statues with element puzzles, and clearing these puzzles leads into the Light Hall. It's here that the group runs into Darsal and Drumhort, whose response is to sink into the ground. The penultimate challenge in Forever Kingdom is this really cool gauntlet of enemies, much like the Soaring Tower in EverGrace. It was easy since they were all weak to ice, and I had leveled up Ice Palmyra actions throughout the game. The gang goes around activating the 4 elemental pillars, and now they get to sink into the ground too. Felk and Saris reappear, joining in on the sinking into the ground amusement park ride, and they confront Drumhort. Turns out they're actually half-brothers. I do like this interaction they have.
I found you because I wanted to tell you one thing, brother. You were always concerned that we had different mothers. You always protected me, and you always wanted me to be the runner-up. Why must you always act like this? You always think that you get the short end of the deal. Worry all by yourself and run from the army? And then you get fooled by some cheat like Darsal? Foolish. You're not stupid like this. What happened?
Is that all? You came here to tell me that? Felk, you're still nothing more than a child.
Felk immediately loses the battle after one sword swing and is pulled off the battlefield, and the fight against Darsal and Drumhort begins. And this fight is hard. This is the single most difficult boss fight in the entire series. Darsal will jump around doing flips and shit in the background while Drumhort rushes you down, dealing insane amounts of damage. There's a floating eye thing shooting lasers too. Drumhort alone is pretty tough to fight, and I think it took me more than 5 attempts over an hour to finally accidentally kill Darsal, who just happened to keep showing up in front of Darius. Killing Drumhort after this became a lot easier because Darsal could no longer summon the big eye thing or lock the group in a purple cage. After being defeated, Darsal finally reveals what you've likely already put together by now. Faye's soul is connected to Solka's. Drumhort kills Darsal, seemingly having been freed from whatever curse he was under, and the twin goddess statues begin glowing. The twin goddesses wake up and we get the real final boss fight in Forever Kingdom. This fight is very cool thematically, but it was hard to appreciate in the moment because of the fact that I only accidentally got past the first boss fight and never got an opportunity to save before the twin goddesses. I also had no life elixirs and the boss music didn't play, so it was kind of a flat experience. We also learned that this crystal is super important and needs to be destroyed to put the twin goddesses to rest. Over the next 20 nerve-wracking minutes, I slowly defeated these two, destroyed the crystal, and finally freed their souls. This is when we find out that the Palmyra doll is actually just Solka. Darsal destroyed her soul by ripping it from her and binding it to a little girl. Thayana, as it turns out. This, I suppose, makes Faye the one who incited the eve of disaster because of the powerful soul contained within her? The final cutscene takes place in the super important Dandelion Field. Carmilla's music box, the treasure that Solka accidentally broke, begins playing from the lake.
I thought Carmilla's treasure was something more valuable. It was only a music box. The ancient empire was completely destroyed over a fight between two sisters over some music box then? How sad.
Do you think that's foolish?
Saris and Felk show up, the Soulbind curse is gone, and Felk becomes the new hope of Solta. Darius and Ryan finally join the Sultan army, but Faye leaves. She doesn't provide much explanation for this, though we can assume it's because she can't bring herself to join the Sultan army after accidentally killing so many sultans. And I'm sad to see her go. This whole story was essentially about her. It's pretty badass to show up and have a whole game be about you and then just say, "Alright, later guys." This roughly leads into the Takase novel, and much like the first game, the end credits are really nice. Forever Kingdom was, in my mind, a step back in a lot of ways. The story was not as engaging for me. Faye being the center of the plot made it pretty neat, but the Felk and Drumhort stuff felt boring at best, if I'm being honest. We don't really have a reason to care about Felk that much. He just shows up, acts like a baby, and destroys a library. Drumhort as a character is slightly more interesting, but when this convenient connection between the two is injected, it just feels contrived. So I wasn't super into that angle. However, this and the Takase novel are the only points in the timeline where Sharline is not alive. And I'm happy that there's some level of exploration of Darius's experiences in a post-Sharline world. The story's eventual conclusion isn't my favorite, as we discussed, but these last two pieces of media do a fairly good job showing a world that Darius has to live in without Sharline. I like that Forever Kingdom was primarily about Faye. Like I said, I think she's a really cool character. Again though, I wish we would have received like a third game that kind of explored some more of Darius's struggles. Forever Kingdom was decisively not about him, the Biliana Forest, Crestbearers, the concept of the cycle, the Rubane Empire, Palmyra, etc. Darius could have been absent from the game, and nothing meaningful would have changed in the story. And I genuinely mean that. Luckily, a lot of my concerns were solved with the Forever Kingdom manga. When I first heard about the Forever Kingdom manga, I kind of assumed it was a nothing burger. Turns out, it's closer to a something burger than I initially thought. The manga is still minimal on story, and it's quite short overall, so I'm going to keep this relatively brief. What it does, from what I can tell, is address some of the story concerns I had with Forever Kingdom. Specifically, the parts of the world it excluded. It's a nice piece, adhering the worlds together in a way I ended up really appreciating by the end. The manga starts by talking about the Biliana Forest's sapping of resources, and hints at the ambiguity surrounding its powers. Like we saw, this was mostly excluded from Forever Kingdom, and the manga states that both sides of the conflict have their own noble reasons to fight. Okay, good. I really appreciate this being stated outright, since that's how I feel about the conflict myself. I kind of felt like Forever Kingdom was almost pointing a finger at Solta as the aggressors, and that didn't sit right with me. It's nice to get that cleared up. The manga shows our trio fighting mutants, EverGrace's new term for monsters, and they come across a particular Biliana tree that has these undateable relics embedded within it. I'm assuming this has something to do with the cycle, evidence of life that is now in the distant past. Ryan tosses away one of these relics, and the resulting bright light from its impact with the ground piques Fayana's interest. Seeing Fayana's behavior in the manga expands on her characterization significantly. It's much more obvious, when she's not feeling guilty about Solka and Carmilla, that she's not just this timid character who simply follows around Darius and Ryan like a lost puppy. I mentioned her lack of agency in the game, and I think the manga makes up for that. She then, of course, begins messing around with the Biliana tree relics, much to Darius's disapproval. And moments like this are exactly what I would expect from these three. It's what I wanted more of from Forever Kingdom. There was the moment early in the game with the child's drawing where I mentioned how much I enjoyed this dynamic, and I was sad they didn't show more of it. That was written before I read the manga. I love their interactions here. At the designated exposition camp of the night, we find out that they're at the same spot where Fayana was found unconscious. Later in the night, she's unable to sleep and gets up to talk with Darius, who is still kind of weird in his lovable, unique Forever Kingdom way, discussing his crest with her and reassuring her that she shouldn't really worry so much about her existential fears. She's here now, and that's what really matters. This is when they're suddenly attacked by monsters. Reacting to the relics within the Biliana trees, Darius's crest begins glowing once again, something we've only observed happening a number of times now. And I think this might be the best and only look we really get at the crest's powers as far as Darius is concerned. Ryan seems to recognize what's going on and tries to escape with Faye. He suspects that this may be due to a particularly powerful relic hidden in one of the nearby trees, so Ryan and Faye begin searching. Chapter 2 starts out with another flashback with Darius and Sharline, another instance of young Darius struggling with his crest, apparently having recently gotten into a fight over it. We quickly return to our group, and this is where the most interesting part of the manga takes place, in my opinion. In Darius's berserked state, we get a number of flashbacks to his childhood and the incident with Sharline. The art here is amazing. Darius finds himself in a giant empty field. Off in the distance, what I can only assume is a Biliana tree. Regardless of what exactly this is, it's the same structure from the beginning of the first game. To bring everything back around in this nearly 210-minute long journey through the world of EverGrace, I believe this is the gruesome pillar that the texts in the first game mentioned. I never actually elaborated further on that concept, so it's a good thing I eventually looked into the manga where I finally put it all together. I think it's almost poetic that this is one of the first things we ever see, and also one of the last points of emphasis in the entire series. Darius turns around, and this is where he once again sees Sharline. They exchange a few words, but Darius quickly returns to reality, unable to hold on to her presence. And I really liked this. Whatever the mechanisms behind this encounter, I interpreted this once more as a kind of dreamlike state. And this is what loss feels like. Anyone who's experienced painful loss will tell you as much. Against your wishes, forces beyond your control, dreams in most cases, will inevitably have you confront your loss whether you like it or not. Suddenly, the person you lost is back, and before you can really understand why or how, you're thrown back to reality, once again forced to accept their absence. I think for maybe the first time in this series, I finally felt as though my initial observation and theories as to what's happening might not be too far off after all. And I really think it's amazing that the first thing Darius sees when waking up is Ryan and Fayana, the two people who are here with him now in the moment, two people he hadn't lost. The manga ends with Fayana overjoyed that Darius is unharmed and a quote that I really loved. Like the olden warriors who carried burdens heavier than their swords, maybe one day I'll break free of these chains that bind me. That is a story still yet to come.